Aegon Targaryen stood atop the highest hill along the mouth of the Blackwater, the wind coming off the sea and scraping against the tents of his makeshift encampment. Though dawn tinted the eastern sky with gentle violets and blues, there was no sweetness in this hour for Aegon's heart. He stared at the horizon, his gloved fingers brushing the rough pommel of Blackfire at his hip, and in his mind's eye he saw not the water nor the promise of conquest, but the visage of his 3 dragons. Balerion, the dread beast of night-black scales. Vhagar, the graceful she-dragon who soared with silver fire in her maw, and Meraxes, proud and lethal, pale in color, an emblem of the Targaryen might. They were the pillars of his ambition, living embodiments of House Targaryen's dominion over these lands. With them, he had planned to cement his legacy in Westeros, forging not just a kingdom, but an empire that would endure for generations. Yet the wind held a chill of foreboding. The world was a shifting tapestry, and one loose thread could unravel it all. He could hear Visenya's footfalls before she spoke. His older sister always carried with her an undercurrent of quiet authority. When she reached his side, her armor gleamed faintly in the half-light. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that spoke more than any words. They both knew that in the days to come, everything would hinge on the might of their winged terrors. After a moment's pause, her voice, smoky with the husk of early morning, cut through the hush. "I worry for them," she said. "The dragons, so near to the fields and the petty lords. I do not like that we must keep them chained at night." Aegon offered a grim nod. "Nor do I," he said. "But we cannot risk them rampaging across the countryside, burning small folk without reason. Our hold here is too fragile. Word of that kind of destruction would turn even more foes against us. We have enough enemies as it is." Visenya's gauntlet hand tightened on his shoulder, and a ghost of a smile curved her lips. "Enemies who will break when they see flames blossom in the skies. Once they truly behold dragons. Once they know our might." Aegon set his jaw. He found no comfort in the illusions of the unstoppable Targaryen legend. While it was true that a single dragon on the battlefield could lay waste to thousands of foot soldiers, the realm was vast, and cunning men lurked in every corner. There were rumors of new alliances, whispered pacts, and hidden agendas. The unification of lords who might put aside their grudges if only for a chance to rid themselves of the Targaryen threat. Harren the Black with his monstrous fortress at Harrenhal. Argilac the arrogant of Storm's End, who had already spurned Aegon's offers of a marriage alliance. The Lannisters in the west, the Gardener King in the Reach, each was formidable in their own domain. And if they ever found a weapon to rival or even neutralize the dragons. He tried to dispel the thought, but the chill on the wind would not let him. Behind them, the Targaryen banners flapped, the red 3-headed dragon on a field of black. In that symbol lay the hope of the Targaryen host. Yet as the first rays of the sun set the cloth aflame in color, Aegon found himself unsettled by his own doubts. He and Visenya turned when they heard footsteps in the grass. Rhaenys approached with the graceful step of a cat, her dark hair braided with small silver rings. She came with news. Her expression was caught between urgency and frustration. "We have a messenger," she said. "From the Stormlands." "From Argilac?" Visenya asked. "Yes," Rhaenys replied. She cast her eyes out to the still waters of the Blackwater. "He brings words of negotiation, or so he says." Aegon exchanged a knowing look with Visenya. Argilac had been many things, but never pliant. Not truly. "Show me," he said quietly. Rhaenys led them back through the tents, past knights in half-donned armor, yawning as they stood for the morning watch. A handful of black-armored guards parted to reveal a short, muscled man in the cloak of the Stormlands. He knelt before Aegon, but the wariness in his eyes spoke volumes. Aegon had seen that cautious glare in men who had stared across battlefields, those who weighed every moment, every breath, as if it were a bargaining chip. "My lord," said the messenger, voice trembling, "I come with tidings from King Argilac." He hesitated, waiting for a nod to continue. "He sends me to say, there has been a grave threat discovered in the heart of your encampment. He knows not whether you're aware of it, but a band of outlaws from Essos, rumored to be allied with the rogue prince from Lys, have set their eyes upon your dragons. My king, in his benevolence, wishes only to protect the realm from the havoc these unscrupulous men may wreak. Rhaenys let out a small scoff. Argilax's benevolence? The man who refused us and threatened war if we set foot near his borders. Aegon lifted a hand to silence her, his purple eyes locked on the messenger. And how does King Argilax propose to save my dragons? He asked, carefully measuring his words. The messenger wet his lips with a dry tongue. He proposes an alliance, my lord, one in which you share the knowledge of your beasts' whereabouts and movements, so his men can guard against these brigands. Once the threat is eliminated, he pledges to discuss your claims upon the Iron Throne in a civilized manner. A low rumble of anger stirred in Visenya's throat. A fool's proposition, she hissed. He thinks we will so easily reveal the dragon's secrets? The messenger paled, eyes darting to the side as if he expected a sword to his neck at any moment. I only deliver his message. He says to remind you that enemies abound. That, Aegon cut in. Is there proof of these brigands or this so-called threat? Or only Argilax's word? The messenger bowed, trembling. He claims to have captured one of the band, who confessed under torture. He warns there is a plot to strike soon, while your camp is spread thin. Visenya crossed her arms. If these outlaws exist, we'll deal with them ourselves. There was an implicit threat behind her words, a warning that the Targaryens would tolerate no meddling. Aegon stepped closer to the messenger, voice low and even. Tell your king we thank him for his concern, and that we shall keep a closer watch on the dragons. As for the alliance, I will consider it when I see the heads of the bandits who threaten us. The messenger's eyes flickered with relief that he wasn't going to die on the spot. He bowed hastily, stumbling as he backed away. The tension in the tent was palpable, thick as the morning's humidity. When the guards took the messenger away, Aegon finally exhaled, and the faint lines around his eyes betrayed the worry in his heart. Rhaenys brushed her brother's arm. You think Argilax speaks any truth? Or is this some ploy to coax out the dragons? Aegon considered for a long moment, letting the hush settle. Outside, the rustle of the canvas and the distant clank of arms reminded him that an army breathed around them, an entire host reliant on the presence of 3 mythical beasts. I don't know, he admitted, but Argilax is not alone in wanting the dragons neutralized. It would be wise to place them under greater guard. Rhaenys nodded. We still have men loyal to us from Dragonstone and beyond. We'll set up watch rotations. No one goes near the dragons without a Targaryen guard to see it. Visenya took a step forward. If Argilax is playing us false, we should consider a swift strike against the Stormlands. The best defense is a crushing offense. Let them feel Balerian's fire. Let the Storm King remember why he should have accepted our marriage offer. But Aegon's gaze was distant, lost in the swirl of his own concerns. In time, he said. For now, let's focus on ensuring that no threat, real or imagined, catches us off guard. They left the messenger's tent and walked toward the clearing where the 3 dragons were kept. A series of chains, carefully wrought iron links so massive it took 3 blacksmiths to lift one in place, circled each creature's thick neck. Balerion stirred first, the ground reverberating with an echo of power. The great black drake let out a rumble that vibrated the marrow of one's bones. Eyes narrowed as if scanning for prey. Mare axes, silver-white in the climbing sun, gave an irritated snap at the approach of stable hands who lugged barrels of raw meat. And Vagor, smaller than Balerion yet still a behemoth, unfurled one wing, stirring a gust that kicked up sand and grit. Aegon walked slowly, meeting the black eyes of his monstrous mount. Balerion exhaled a breath of warm air, hot enough to make the air shimmer around Aegon's face. Guard them well, Aegon murmured to his retinue. 100 men if you must, night and day. The knights saluted, an edge of pride in their stance. Guarding the dragons was a coveted duty, a place of honor. But behind their pride, Aegon could sense the tension. None of them wanted to be responsible for a draconic rampage if something went awry. And if indeed there were outlaws cunning enough to threaten these beasts, the men on guard would face a threat both from within and without, from the bandits' cunning and the dragon's own unpredictability. Aegon forced himself to walk among them, to smile and give words of encouragement. Yet with each step, the weight on his heart grew. A Targaryen conquest was unstoppable only if the dragons flew free. If some cunning mind found a way to cage or control them, or worse, to use them, House Targaryen would be undone. That very afternoon, Aegon held a council in his large pavilion where the map of Westeros sprawled upon a wooden table. Rhaenys and Visenya stood with him, as did Orys Baratheon, his loyal friend and rumored half-brother, alongside half a dozen knights and lords sworn to their cause. They debated what to do next. Argilac's warning loomed in every conversation, as did the possibility of trickery. Rhaenys tapped a slender finger on the Stormlands. If we ride for Storm's End now, we will appear to fear Argilac's threat. It might embolden the rest of our enemies. Orys shook his head. If we do nothing, it could be worse. We show we trust him not. But if outlaws truly plot against us, we appear negligent. Aegon quietly studied the painted mountains, rivers, and strongholds. His sisters waited. After a long silence, he said, "Double the guard on the dragons. Post watchers at every path leading into camp. And if Argilac claims to have caught one of these bandits, we can invite him to show proof. Let him produce the man who confessed." As the council broke, Aegon strode out alone for a time, feeling the pressure mounting. Since the day he and his sisters first landed, their success had hinged on their dragons. They were the sharp tip of the spear, the unstoppable advantage that made armies bend the knee. How, then, could someone steal them? In the weeks that followed, small skirmishes erupted here and there. Scouts vanished in the night. A few watchers reported glimpses of shadowy figures near the boundaries of the Targaryen camp, but no one was caught. The men became restless. Whispers spread that magic from the north or from across the narrow sea might be at play. Some claimed a secret cadre of warlocks had come from Karth to trade illusions for coin. Others insisted it was the Red Priests of R'hllor, eager to claim a dragon for their fiery god. Each rumor only added to the swirling unease. And then, one night, chaos erupted. It began with a distant roar, Merax's cry slicing through the silence of the early hours. Aegon bolted upright in his tent, heart hammering, as the alarm bell began to clang. He grabbed Blackfyre, still wearing only his breeches, and ran into the darkness, Visenya and Rhaenys on his heels. The encampment was ablaze with torchlight. Shouts from a dozen throats filled the air. Soldiers ran in confusion. Aegon forced his way through, pushing men aside, ignoring the swirl of half-clothed knights and stumbling servants. At the clearing where the dragons were chained, he saw a ring of bodies, guards slain, their blood dark under the flickering light. The chains lay slack on the ground, broken apart or perhaps melted, and Merax's was gone. Aegon's breath caught in his throat. He spun around, searching for Balerion and Vhagar. They were there, rearing up in anger, their roars unearthly. Smoke drifted from their nostrils. The stench of burned flesh permeated the clearing. Among the dead, there were men wearing foreign leathers, sigils none recognized, eyes glazed in death. But Merax's chain was sundered, the post torn from the ground. The monstrous she-dragon had been taken. Sick dread seized Aegon. "Search!" he bellowed, voice raw. "Find her!" Visenya's eyes blazed with fury. How could they have gotten so close? She demanded of the surviving guards, who shook with fear and shame. Rhaenys clutched the hilt of her sword, her knuckles white. "It was sorcery, my lord," one guard stammered. "They came from the dark. We saw them raise their hands, and the shadows moved. Then Merax's roared and her eyes. They put something in her eyes." She was maddened. Aegon placed a hand on the guard's shoulder. "Focus," he said. What did these men look like? The guard's eyes were wide, as though he recalled a nightmare. They wore black cloaks, some with a crest I've never seen. It wasn't Westerosi. A stag, but twisted or perhaps a foreign symbol. They used spears that spat sparks. I cannot describe it well. They were maybe a dozen. Visenya cursed under her breath. Rhaenys looked to Aegon, her face stricken. If they can do this to Meraxes, what about Vhagar and Balerion? Are they safe? At that moment, Balerion let out a roar that shook the earth, as if in answer. He snapped his chain, flapping massive wings in agitation. The black dragon's eyes glowed with wrath, but he did not take flight. Knights swarmed with torches, forming a wide circle to give him space. Vhagar snarled in another corner of the clearing, smoke curling from between her jaws. She seemed equally agitated but unhurt. Aegon could think only of Meraxes. He had raised her from a hatchling, fed her, flown on her back. That she could be stolen away was unthinkable, yet here they stood with an empty chain. He ground his teeth. "Mount up," he said to Visenya. "You and Rhaenys take the sky on Vhagar and Balerion. Scour the fields, the forest, the roads. If they've led Meraxes away, track them." Visenya and Rhaenys nodded in unison. Rhaenys stepped toward Balerion, her expression apprehensive. Though she had flown him before, he was primarily Aegon's mount. The black beast eyed her with suspicion, but a soft word and careful approach calmed him enough to climb the scaled flank. Visenya moved to Vhagar. Within moments, the two remaining dragons took flight, their wings beating thunder against the night sky, forging a circle of flame-lit darkness above. Aegon barked orders to the men on the ground. "No one leaves camp without my say. Form search parties. We'll hunt every inch of the surrounding lands at first light." Dawn brought no relief. Visenya and Rhaenys returned at sunrise, exhausted, having found no sign of Meraxes or the captors. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The dread that settled on the Targaryen camp was heavy, a suffocating pall. Rumors flew among the men that the dragon had been killed, that foreign sorcerers had spirited her away to distant Essos, that Argilac had used black magic. Mistrust festering, the men looked for someone to blame. Aegon tried to maintain composure, but his nights grew sleepless. He refused to let Balerion out of his sight for more than an hour at a time. The war plans ground to a halt. None of the Targaryen generals wished to risk the realm's two remaining dragons until Meraxes was found or accounted for. Meanwhile, the lords of Westeros began to hear of the theft. Some openly mocked the Targaryens, dragons stolen like petty trinkets in the night. Some admired the cunning of whoever had pulled off this impossible feat. A fortnight later, the first raven arrived. Its message bore no name, only a coat of arms that was little known in Westeros. A black stag's head wreathed in what might have been flames. Beneath the sigil was a single line in a foreign tongue, accompanied by a rough translation. "We have your dragon. Our demands will follow." Aegon crumpled the parchment in his fist. He paced in his pavilion, the map of Westeros untouched on the table behind him. Rhaenys and Visenya studied him with guarded eyes, each waiting to see if his fury would explode. Outside, the normal hum of the camp had grown quieter. The men sensed their leader's rage. Visenya spoke first, her voice cold. "They mock us. Whoever they are, they waste time with threats and theatrics. We should hunt them down, track them to the ends of the earth if we must." Rhaenys placed a calming hand on Visenya's arm. "We don't yet know who they are or where they've taken Meraxes. Storm's End is a possibility. Argilac or his men might have hired foreign sellswords, or perhaps Harren the Black, or even someone from Essos who crossed the sea. Many would pay handsomely to neutralize House Targaryen's power." Aegon closed his eyes, inhaling through his nose, forcing himself to remain collected. "Send word to every ally we have. Let them know we're offering a bounty for any clue leading to Meraxes. Triple the normal rate. We'll also request urgent audiences with each of the great lords. See how they respond. If Argilac had any hand in this, he'll slip." Rhaenys nodded, but hesitation shadowed her features. "And if we discover that it's truly some foreign cabal? How far do we chase them?" "As far as we must," Aegon answered flatly. The unspoken words danced in the tense air. He would burn entire fleets, entire cities, if that was what it took to reclaim his dragon and restore the Targaryen might. It took another week for a second raven to arrive, this one bearing a longer message. The parchment demanded that the Targaryens withdraw all forces from the mainland and renounce their claim to Westeros. That in exchange for a vow never to cross the narrow sea again with war in mind, Meraxes would be returned alive. There was a time limit set. If Aegon did not comply within one moon's turn, they would kill Meraxes. Attached was a small scale, white as pearl, from Meraxes' hide, a grim token of proof. Rhaenys bit back a cry when she saw it, her eyes rimmed with tears. Visenya turned livid, her sword hand twitching. Aegon read the parchment 3 times, each pass igniting fresh fury in his blood. To renounce the conquest was unthinkable. His name, his legacy, everything he had built or dreamed would collapse in an instant. But to lose Meraxes, to kill one of the only 3 dragons House Targaryen possessed, would be a blow beyond measure. The symbol of House Targaryen was the 3-headed dragon for a reason. Balerion, Vhagar, Meraxes, each head representing the siblings, the unity, the unstoppable power that had set them apart from all other conquerors. He stood at the edge of the clearing where Balerion and Vhagar were carefully guarded. The dragons sensed the tension, as they often did. Balerion's massive tail swept across the ground, leaving a furrow in the dirt. In his pavilion, the lords and knights waited for Aegon's decision. Outside, the hush of the morning pressed in with stifling weight. When he finally stepped back inside, his sisters and Orys Baratheon watched him, searching his eyes for an answer. "We do not yield," he said softly, "but neither can we charge blindly. We'll devise a plan, track them, rescue Meraxes, and then make them regret their insolence." Orys nodded, the scar over his left brow pulling taut. "I've already sent out riders. No expense will be spared to find who is behind this. If there's a stink of Argilax involvement, I'll smell it." Aegon glanced down at the scale on the table, a single piece of the dragon who had once soared beside him in fiery triumph. He clenched his fists. "Gather our best spymasters, our best huntsmen, and get me everything they know about this black stag sigil. The Storm King's banner is a stag, yes, but gold and crowned. This black stag in flames is unfamiliar. Could it be a distorted copy? A new house from Essos? Some mercenary company? We find that sigil, we find Meraxes." Within days, information trickled in. Word of a group called the Shadow Stags, rumored to have been formed by a disgraced noble from the Stormlands who fled across the sea years ago. He'd sold his sword to magisters in Lys, grown rich in the trade of secrets and slaves. Over time, he gathered a band of exiled knights, hedge wizards, and sellswords, forging a private army loyal to his coin. The black stag in flames was their sign, a twisted homage to the lineage he claimed to have once been wronged by. "A disgraced Baratheon bastard," Orys growled as the spymaster recounted the rumor. "One who fled his homeland to escape punishment for raiding merchant ships. I recall hearing a rumor of that. By the gods, the arrogance to style himself after the stag and commit these atrocities." They were believed to operate off a hidden outpost on the coast south of Storm's End, a secluded cove that opened into the sea. The spymaster had no direct evidence Meraxes was there, but the accounts pointed to the possibility. If the Black Stag was behind it, the Targaryens finally had a lead. An idea crystallized. The Shadow Stags might have used stealth and potent drugs or sorcery to subdue Meraxes long enough to whisk her away by sea, heading to this hidden fortress. If that were the case, it was no small feat, but the scale from Meraxes was proof they had her alive. At once, Aegon formulated a plan to strike the cove, but he had to move carefully. Any direct assault might push the captors to kill Meraxes out of spite. In clandestine fashion, he assembled a small strike force, himself, Visenya, Rhaenys, Orys, and a handful of their best knights. With Balerion and Vhagar overhead, they would approach by ship, under cover of darkness, and infiltrate the cove. Once they had Meraxes' location and a path to free her, the dragons would descend, unleashing their wrath. In the hour before they set out, Aegon sought a private moment with Balerion. The black dragon snorted, belching a small flame that singed the grass near Aegon's feet. He laid a hand on the creature's scaled neck, his voice cracking with raw emotion. "I will not lose her," he murmured. "We are Targaryens. Fire and blood. None can hold our kind in chains." Balerion blinked, revealing a slitted pupil of molten gold. Aegon felt a fierce bond surge through him, as though the dragon understood his determination. They would ride into the darkness. They would defy the unimaginable. Night fell on the cove south of Storm's End, the moon a mere sliver in the sky. Two small ships hugged the rocky shoreline. Aegon stood on the deck of the lead vessel, wearing black leather that blended with the night. No Targaryen banners fluttered here, only stealth. The water was eerily still. Beyond the spires of rock, a hidden beach and a stretch of cave-riddled cliffs lay in wait. Visenya and Rhaenys flew overhead, far out of sight. Vhagar and Balerion circled the area, silent phantoms in the clouded sky. At a signal, 3 lamps shielded, uncovered in a precise pattern. Visenya descended swiftly, delivering a cadre of knights onto the shore. Aegon's boat followed, slipping onto the pebbled beach. The men rushed forward, swords drawn, but no alarm was raised. The cove appeared deserted at first glance. Aegon led them forward, stepping carefully among the rocks. Then they spotted the torchlight flickering in the distance, near a yawning cave entrance. The knights spread out. Orys Baratheon, hulking in dark mail, walked at Aegon's flank. They advanced, each footstep muffled by sand. A faint wind hissed through the caves, carrying the dank smell of salt and brine. Water dripped from stalactites, echoing in the gloom. They saw no guards posted outside, which put them on edge. This was too easy. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. He was tall, clad in black leathers, a stag's head embroidered on his chest. He moved like a cat, silent and poised, a sword in one hand, a strange rod in the other. He hissed a warning, and from the darkness, 6 men materialized, each armed with similarly odd rods and spears. Aegon raised Blackfire. The clang of steel erupted in the cramped cave mouth. Orys lunged, parrying a blow from a spear that seemed to crackle with arcane energy at the tip. Another knight cried out as sparks danced across his armor, sending him reeling. Aegon engaged the tall figure, steel meeting steel. Their swords rang out, the man's technique swift and fluid. He wielded the rod in his offhand, a small flicker of greenish light at its tip. Aegon felt a tingling sensation in the air, like static before a lightning strike. He blocked a thrust, barely. The rod crackled, and a jolt of some unknown force skittered along the edge of Aegon's armor, numbing his left arm. Gritting his teeth, Aegon pressed forward. The man sneered. "You are Aegon Targaryen?" He spat in a foreign accent. "You come too late. We have your other monster caged." Enraged, Aegon disengaged, fainted, and sliced upward with Blackfire. The blade tore across the man's chest, spraying blood. He staggered back with a gasp. Seeing their leader wounded, the other shadow stags faltered. Orys bashed one's head in with a steel pommel, while the knights overcame the rest. The fight was brutal but swift. Bodies fell among the cave's rocky ground, the hiss of the sea swallowing their last breaths. Aegon grabbed the tall man by his tunic, forcing him to his knees. "Where is Meraxes?" The man laughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "She's beyond your reach, in the deep caverns, chained with spells stronger than your illusions. Kill me if you like, but you'll never break those wards without the warlocks." Aegon pressed the tip of Blackfire under the man's chin. "Who hired you? Did Argilac pay for this?" The man's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "Argilac? We need no kings. This is bigger than some petty warlord. We want the Conqueror undone." He coughed, his body trembling. "No more dragons. No more Targaryens. Your doom is sealed, and our reward will be incalculable." Aegon started to speak, but the man's eyes rolled back in his head as a last shudder racked his frame. He coughed out a laugh, then collapsed, lifeless. Frustration mounted in Aegon. He let the body drop and looked to Orys, who grimaced. Warlocks? They must have brought them from Essos, Orys said. No wonder they overcame meraxes. They pressed deeper into the cave. The flickering torchlight revealed a labyrinth of twisting tunnels. Occasionally, they found evidence of the shadow stags. Supply crates, half-extinguished campfires, footprints in the damp sand. In one chamber, they came upon a newly constructed iron grate. Beyond it, the tunnel sloped downward, a rancid smell emanating from below. Two more of the black-clad men stood guard. Aegon's knights leapt forward, killing them before they could cry out. They pushed open the grate. The tunnel beyond was steep, requiring them to proceed single file. Water dripped from above, forming shallow puddles that reflected their wavering torchlight. Aegon's heart pounded as he imagined meraxes alone in the darkness, bound by strange sorceries. He could almost feel her presence, as if the blood of the dragon within him sensed her agony. At last, they emerged into a cavern so large the torchlight failed to reveal its farthest corners. The crash of the sea reverberated through the darkness, implying a hidden inlet. Then they heard it, a deep, low moan that shook the walls. The knights froze, torches quivering. Aegon's breath caught. It was Merax's, her voice echoing off the stone. The sorrow in that sound cut through him like a blade. They advanced carefully. Chains rattled, then a spark of movement. Torchlight fell upon the pale scales of the dragon. Merax's was pinned to the cavern floor by thick iron manacles that glowed with faint, unearthly runes. Her wings were bound, her head chained tight, jaws muzzled with barbed steel. She let out another pitiful groan. Her eyes, usually full of fierce intelligence, were clouded, ringed by some blackish residue. Behind her, a small group of robed figures chanted in a language Aegon didn't recognize, their voices echoing in the hollow space. Visenya and Rhaenys emerged from a side passage, having looped around through another cave entrance to flank the robed figures. At once, a fight erupted. The robed warlocks snarled incantations. Flames of unnatural colors danced in the air. One knight burst into green fire, screaming as he fell. Another reeled as illusions of serpents writhed around his face. Orys bellowed a war cry, hacking at the warlocks with his sword, scattering their circle. Aegon rushed to Merax's side. She snarled through the muzzle, her tail thrashing weakly. Her large eyes locked onto him, and he saw recognition there, behind the haze of whatever drug or spell she endured. He tried to pry at the muzzle, but it was sealed with some complex mechanism. Rhaenys came, using a slender blade to search for a latch. Visenya, fending off a warlock, slashed the man's chanting throat, silencing him. Yet even as they overwhelmed the warlocks, the glow of the manacles did not fade. One last warlock, a woman with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes, hurled a black sphere onto the ground. It cracked with a deafening shriek. Darkness enveloped the cavern like living shadow. For a heartbeat, everything was madness. Aegon heard the roars of men and the hiss of some unnatural darkness swirling around them. He clung to Merax's, yelling for Rhaenys or Visenya, but the swirling blackness disoriented him. It felt alive, pressing against his senses. Then a gust of wind tore the darkness apart, and in the flicker of remaining torchlight, he saw Balerion. The great black dragon had forced his bulk through the tunnels, smashing rock and warlocks alike. His jaws parted in a thunderous roar, fanning the cavern with a scorching wave of flame that devoured the last of the living shadows. The darkness receded. The warlocks lay dead or scattered in pieces. Torchlight revealed a scene of destruction. Bodies, blood, and broken spells lay strewn across the cave. Yet Merax's still lay chained, trembling. Aegon, coughing from the smoke, reached for the manacles, searching for any clasp or seam. Orys joined him, cursing as he tried to wedge a knife between the runic links. Nothing yielded. Visenya knelt beside one warlock's body, rummaging for a key or artifact. With a growl, she found a small bag of powders and twisted runes carved on stone. Meanwhile, Rhaenys discovered a hammered metal ring that seemed to hum with arcane energy. "Could this be?" she started, but Aegon snatched it, pressing it to the manacles. The runes flared, then dimmed. With a groan of metal, the iron manacles sagged. Aegon rushed to remove the muzzle, and Mare Axes gave a ragged exhalation once free. She lifted her head weakly, battered and drugged. A sob of relief escaped Rhaenys. Aegon pressed a hand to Merax's scaled snout, meeting the reptilian gaze. "We've got you," he said, voice thick. "They will pay 1,000 times over for this." But the warlock's sabotage had not ended. The cavern groaned. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, damage from Balerian's forced entry. Water gushed in from a break along one wall, flooding the floor. "We need to get out," Orys shouted, beckoning them. Meraxes tried to move, but she stumbled, dazed. The spells and poisons had weakened her to the point of collapse. "Balerion can help," Aegon said, "but getting 2 dragons out of this labyrinth would be no easy feat." The tide rushed in, waves pounding the walls. Already, the water rose ankle-high, swirling around the fallen. With great effort, Aegon and the knights guided Meraxes into a wide tunnel. Balerion, leading the way, smashed rock with his claws, expanding the passage. At every tremor of the earth, dust and stones rained down from above. Half submerged now, they pressed forward. By the time they found the exit, the water was chest-deep. Merax's tail lashed behind her, her wings pinned by the cramped tunnel. With a final push, Balerion emerged onto a rocky beach. The men staggered out, gasping. Visenya and Rhaenys helped guide Meraxes until her front claws dug into the sand, pulling her free. The great she-dragon collapsed onto the shore, breathing raggedly. But she was alive, reunited with her Targaryen kin. Aegon collapsed next to her flank, chest heaving. Dawn's pale glow crept over the horizon, painting the waves with ghostly light. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply listened to the crash of the sea and the labored breathing of the battered dragon. Then Orys motioned to the mouth of the cove. "We should go," he said quietly. "The entire network of caves is flooding, and if any survivors remain, they'll be on our trail." Visenya wiped blood from her sword. "Let them come," she snarled. But Rhaenys gave her a weary look. Meraxes needed healing, and the Targaryens needed to consolidate their strength. Vhagar landed on the beach behind them, flapping her wings. She let out a low growl, nosing Meraxes as though trying to rouse her sister. Meraxes blinked languidly, letting out a soft groan. Aegon turned his gaze inland, toward Storm's End. Whether Argilac was guilty or not, a far worse threat had revealed itself. A band of warlocks and renegade knights, seeking not simply to hamper the Targaryen conquest but to eradicate dragons entirely. They had proven that Targaryen power was not absolute. In the face of cunning, sorcery, and subterfuge, even mighty dragons could be stolen, could be chained. That reality weighed on Aegon's mind. If the realm learned how vulnerable dragons truly were, if more men discovered methods to incapacitate them, House Targaryen would lose the fear that kept potential rebellions in check. Their rule might crumble before it truly began. And yet, as he looked at his sisters, at Orys, at the knights who had risked their lives in that watery hell to save Meraxes, he felt a surge of renewed determination. They had rescued her. The Targaryens might have been wounded, but they were not broken. They set sail back for their main camp with Meraxes tethered to a reinforced barge that had once transported war horses. The crossing was perilous. Meraxes thrashed often, her mind ravaged by strange potions. She cried out in delirium. Vhagar circled overhead, sometimes roaring in response, as though lending her sister moral support. Balerion flew with ominous silence, his black wings slicing through the sky, watchful for any further ambush. When they arrived at the Targaryen encampment at the mouth of the Blackwater, men cheered to see Meraxes returned, though the dragon's weakened state brought worry. The maesters on Aegon's payroll scrambled with salves and drafts. None had ever tended to a dragon's wounds, let alone injuries sustained through unknown magic. But they did what they could, carefully washing her eyes, coaxing her to swallow potions to purge the toxins. Slowly, Merix's breathing grew steadier. She would live, though whether she would fly again soon was another matter. Over the next few days, the entire camp buzzed with the news. Men marveled at the lengths to which the enemy had gone. Dark talk spread of shadow binding, black magic from Aes-High, or the arcane powers of the faceless men. Everyone had a theory. Fear lingered in every corner. The Targaryen infiltration had revealed that the unthinkable was indeed possible. A dragon could be kidnapped. Aegon's brow furrowed as he met with his war council. We must show the realm that the dragons are still ours, still unstoppable. He paused, glancing at Merix's enclosure. She was chained lightly, not out of mistrust but out of caution, while she recovered. Her appetite was feeble, but it was returning. We'll move on Harrenhal. Let the realm see Balerion and Vhagar in action. Prove to them we still command the skies. Visenya grimaced. Are you certain we shouldn't confront Argilac first? We still don't know if he played a role. Rhaenys answered, if we burn Storm's End without proof, the rest of the kingdoms might see us as tyrants lashing out blindly. We have what we came for, Meraxes. The time for vengeance on the Storm King can come later, when we know the truth. Aegon nodded. Precisely. For now, we must quell the fear among our own ranks. We strike a target that all men fear, Harren the Black. Let them see that even in the face of these new threats, House Targaryen stands firm. Orys, arms folded, agreed. The stories of Harren's cruelty precede him. No one will mourn if you burn Harrenhal to the ground. And it'll show we are not cowed by the theft of Meraxes. That evening, Aegon visited Meraxes alone. The setting sun poured red and gold across the dragon's battered scales. She seemed calmer now, though a sadness lingered in her eyes. Aegon knelt by her mighty flank, running his hand across the smooth, pearlescent ridges. She let out a soft rumble, not quite a purr. He felt her warmth and the faint vibrations of her breath. He recalled the moment he'd hatched her egg in the fires of Dragonstone, the nights he would sing Valyrian lullabies to her as a hatchling. And now, seeing her bruised, her spirit dimmed by captivity, he felt an ache that rivaled heartbreak. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have protected you better. Her only answer was a low rumble that resonated in his chest. Time passed in silence. In that hush, he realized it wasn't just vengeance that drove him. It was the desire to protect what he loved, and the knowledge that his family, his dragons, and his destiny were entwined. He would not allow any power, mortal or arcane, to tear them apart again. The following dawn, the horns sounded throughout the camp. Knights donned armor, swords were sharpened, and the two healthy dragons prepared for flight. Their destination, Harrenhal, the cursed fortress by the god's eye, a looming monument to Harren the Black's vanity and cruelty. Word had it that Harren sneered at rumors of the stolen dragon, calling the Targaryens frail pretenders. If Aegon could show decisive strength here, the stolen dragon fiasco might be overshadowed by a fresh wave of terror. The great lords would think twice before they tried such treachery themselves. Vhagar soared first, Visenya guiding her in a wide arc above the mustering army. Balerion followed, a black storm blotting out the sun, with Rhaenys seated behind Aegon. Meraxes, not yet able to fly, would remain behind under heavy guard. Orys led the ground forces. They marched out in disciplined ranks, headed north through the riverlands, subduing small lords and castles with minimal resistance. The name Targaryen had lost some of its absolute mystique, but it still struck enough fear that many chose to bend the knee rather than test their luck against fire from the skies. At last, they arrived on the fields outside Harrenhal. The enormous castle towered against the horizon, its freshly built towers of black stone jutting up the fingers of a skeletal hand. Harren had believed it would be impregnable, that no army could breach its walls. But that was before dragons. And yet, Aegon felt a coil of unease. What new cunning might Harren have prepared? Perhaps he too had gleaned secrets from the warlocks. They made camp just out of range of Harrenhal's formidable archers. That night, Aegon scarcely slept. He kept recalling the fight in the caves, the rods that crackled with unnatural power, the illusions of darkness. Visenya's words from before hovered in his mind. Enemies abound, and now, though they marched to intimidate Harren, Aegon realized that the realm was far from tamed. The theft of mare-axes had lit a spark in the hearts of every conspirator. If the Targaryens were not invincible, perhaps they could be toppled. Dawn broke with a dull gray sky. Harren's men, massed behind the walls, jeered at the Targaryen lines. Aegon rode toward the fortress gate, flanked by Orys. Balerion flew overhead. A herald's horn announced their approach. Aegon raised his voice, commanding presence. Harren the Black, you who rule from these walls, I, Aegon Targaryen, claim these lands by right of conquest. Come forth and bend the knee, or face fire and blood. From high atop the battlements, Harren's mocking laugh echoed. Dragon Lord, he spat, I've heard your threats, yet your prized she-dragon was stolen like a common purse. Perhaps your might is not so great after all. A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed through Aegon's knights. Orys stiffened. The mention of the stolen dragon was a direct blow to the Targaryen prestige. Aegon kept his composure, eyes fixed on the dark silhouette of Harren. Meraxes has been rescued, he called back. Your petty japes change nothing. You have until sundown to surrender. After that, we burn. Harren turned away without another word. The archers on the walls let loose a volley of arrows that fell short of the Targaryen lines, a silent taunt. Aegon returned to camp, his fury quietly roiling. Yet a hint of doubt gnawed at him. Harren was arrogant, but not a fool. Did he have a plan to repel dragon fire? The fortress's massive towers were built of black stone rumored to be cursed. Yet Aegon believed no castle was truly dragon-proof. As the sun touched the western horizon, Aegon mounted Balerion with Rhaenys, while Visenya took flight on Vhagar. The host below readied siege engines, not to break the walls, but to keep Harren's forces occupied. The plan was straightforward. Set Harrenhal ablaze from above. Show no mercy. The watchers on the towers braced, perhaps believing thick walls would shield them. They were wrong. Balerion dove, unleashing a torrent of flame. The black stone glowed red, then white-hot as the dragonfire poured down. Men on the battlements screamed, shields melting to their arms. The heat was unimaginable, warping the air. Vhagar followed with another stream of searing flames, scorching the towers until they crackled. Aegon circled, unleashing Balerion's fury on one tower after another. Chunks of molten rock fell into the courtyard, igniting everything in their path. Archers tried to fire at the dragons, but their arrows burned mid-flight. At the height of the conflagration, Harren's voice rose in a defiant roar from somewhere within. He bellowed curses at the Targaryens, refusing to yield. But soon the towers collapsed, burying Harren and his men under black stone. The last shrieks died in the inferno. The castle that had been his pride became his tomb. When the smoke cleared, Harrenhal stood half in ruins, its walls blackened and twisted like the carcass of a great beast. The survivors within fled or surrendered. The Targaryen host marched in without resistance, claiming the fortress. Word of Harren's fall spread swiftly, overshadowing gossip of the stolen dragon. Aegon Targaryen and his sisters were still unstoppable, still the harbingers of doom that any who defied them would face. And yet, Aegon knew the illusion of absolute might had been cracked. He felt it in the wary looks of his lords, in the hush that sometimes fell when they recalled how Meraxes was taken. Perhaps the conquest would continue. Perhaps the other kings would bend the knee in time. But the knowledge of vulnerability hovered like a vulture. If a small band of renegades could subdue a dragon, what if entire armies learned such dark arts? On returning to the Blackwater camp, they found Meraxes improved. She recognized Aegon and let out a deep, welcoming growl. Her eyes were clearer, and although she couldn't yet take to the air, she spread her wings in a show of recovery. The men cheered. For a moment, the Targaryen cause felt as strong as ever. Aegon summoned the lords loyal to him, along with his sisters and Orys, in a private strategy meeting. There, in the dim glow of candlelight, he spoke plainly. Our enemies now know that dragons can be taken by cunning or magic. We cannot allow this knowledge to spread further. We must find out who orchestrated Merix's theft. We must show them, and anyone who might copy them, that their vile attempts will only end in ruin. Visenya nodded. We root them out at the source. We kill them to the last. Rhaenys raised a brow. But how? We slew the warlocks in the caves. If there are more, they're scattered across the sea, in places like Lys or Pentos. Are we to wage a war across the narrow sea as well? Aegon's gaze flickered with grim resolve. We do what we must. Our house's future depends on it. If the Targaryens lose the dragons, we lose everything. So plans were laid to strengthen their position, not just in Westeros but beyond. Spies would be sent to Essos, tasked with infiltrating the warlock circles, unraveling who had financed the Shadow Stags. Rumors pointed to wealthy backers who dreamed of a world free from Targaryen rule. Some said the Triarchs of Volantis might have had a hand, seeing the Targaryen rise as a threat to their expansions. Others murmured of the unseen powers in Qarth or the Red Priests in distant lands. The truth would require time to uncover. Meanwhile, in Westeros, the Targaryen forces pressed on. Castles fell, lords bent the knee. Aegon received their oaths with measured courtesy, always holding the memory of Merix's captivity close. Visenya led a contingent to secure the Vale, forging alliances with key families. Rhaenys remained near the camp to nurture Meraxes back to her full strength. Aegon himself oversaw the building of a new fortification at the mouth of the Blackwater, a seat from which House Targaryen might rule, eventually to be called the Red Keep. But beneath every victory lurked the shadow of vulnerability. As tales of a stolen dragon spread, some lords wondered if they too might unseat the Targaryens, if they pooled resources and found the right conjurers or conspirators. Despite Harrenhal's fiery destruction, seeds of rebellion took root in hidden corners, and across the sea, in Lys and Volantis, envoys whispered of the future of dragons, of secrets gleaned from the Shadow Stags, of potions and rods that could subdue even the mightiest beast. On an autumn evening, as the leaves turned gold in the Crownlands, Aegon walked along the ridge overlooking his new capital in the making. Balerion soared overhead, a vigilant sentinel. Rhaenys approached, her steps light on the dry grass. "Meraxes is nearly ready," she said softly, a note of joy in her voice. "We flew together today, just for a short distance. She's still weaker than before, but she can take to the skies again." Aegon's stern demeanor softened. "That is good news," he said, exhaling. "Perhaps we'll soon complete the conquest as we intended." They stood in companionable silence, watching the laborers haul stone for the keep's foundations. The lull of the distant sea met the pounding of hammers. Then Rhaenys spoke again, in a quiet, reflective tone. "I still can't shake the horror of seeing her chained like that, the pain in her eyes. It makes me wonder, if we succeed in uniting Westeros, can we truly keep the dragons safe from all the cunning in this world?" Aegon turned the question over in his mind. He had always assumed that once they forged the kingdom, fear alone would protect them. But fear had not stopped the Shadow Stags. Men had grown bold in their hatred, cunning in their designs. "I don't know," he admitted. "We can keep them close, guard them day and night, but the day may come when the world finds new ways to break us." Rhaenys placed her hand on his. "Then we must be stronger, brother. Stronger in unity, not just in fear. We must win the hearts of the realm, not just their trembling fealty. If we do that, maybe men will not seek to kill what they've learned to respect." Aegon nodded, a subtle warmth stirring in his chest. Rhaenys had always possessed more empathy than he did. He recognized the truth in her words. Tyrants earned only rebellion. He wanted to forge not just a kingdom but a dynasty, one that would endure. Perhaps forging it in fire and blood was only the first step. After that, they would need wisdom. They would need to heal the scars left by war and fear. Visenya joined them then, striding up the ridge with her sword at her hip and a slight sheen of sweat on her brow. She had been practicing with the castle guards, pushing them to near exhaustion. "Preparations are going well," she said. "If Loren Lannister stands against us, we'll be ready to face him. And the Gardener King, too." Aegon smiled wryly. "And if they try their own gambit to steal the dragons?" Visenya's eyes flashed. "They will fail. I'll see to it personally." He believed her. For all his own caution, for all Rhaenys' compassion, it was Visenya's unwavering steel that guarded them from the cunning of their enemies. In her heart beat the unrelenting will that had crushed Harrenhal and would crush any plot to repeat the theft of a dragon. The three of them, together, formed a balance: fire, empathy, and determination. Perhaps it would be enough. They stood at the edge of the ridge, a familial triad against the changing sky. Below, the workers built new walls, forging the skeleton of a grand fortress. Farther beyond, ships dotted the bay, trading vessels and war galleys alike. The Targaryen dream was taking shape. Yet the threat of cunning foes, of black magic, of shifting alliances remained. The memory of Merryx's stolen roar haunted them, a lesson carved in blood and iron. Even the mighty can be brought low by stealth and sorcery. Still, the dragons soared, Balerion and Vhagar in the sky, Merryx's soon to fly beside them once more. Despite everything House Targaryen endured, and so long as a single dragon drew breath, Aegon would fight to defend that living symbol of their power. For he was Aegon the Conqueror, blood of the dragon, fated to unite the seven kingdoms under one rule. No matter the cost, no matter the cunning of his enemies, he would not let his house or his dragons be broken. The days passed, bringing new conquests, new allegiances, and the slow but steady rise of King's Landing as the seat of Targaryen power. The realm bent one piece at a time. Many surrendered without bloodshed, daunted by the fate of Harrenhal. Others made stands that ended swiftly when faced with dragonfire. Through it all, rumors still lingered. Pockets of warlocks in the free cities, new methods to subdue dragons, monstrous alliances forming in the shadows. But none were bold enough to strike again, not yet. Merryx's improved in leaps and bounds, each day drawing her nearer to full strength. The scars from her captivity remained, both on her hide and in her manner, which had grown more cautious. But she never once balked at Rhaenys' presence, and soon they were flying short distances along the coast. On one such flight, they spotted a merchant ship bearing the emblem of the Black Stag in flames. By the time they descended, the vessel had tried to flee. Merryx's roared, unleashing a burst of fire that engulfed the sails. The Targaryen knights boarded the crippled ship, capturing the crew. This time, they took prisoners instead of leaving ashes. Among those prisoners was a slender man with cunning eyes, who claimed to be a mere informant of the Shadow Stags. Under the threat of dragonfire, he revealed a name: Lord Tyro Valentin, a wealthy Lysene who had funded the group. Valentin, it was said, was no friend to Argilac, nor to any Westerosi king, but had a vendetta against the Targaryens for reasons he kept to himself. He had sent the warlocks to the Stormlands, hoping to sabotage Aegon's conquest by robbing him of a dragon. But it seemed the plan was far from over. The captive implied that Valentin might yet have more tricks hidden across the sea. When the interrogation ended, Rhaenys reported these details to Aegon and Visenya. They listened intently, eyes dark with anger. "So it was not Argilac," Aegon said quietly, recalling the Storm King's arrogance. "He likely just wanted to exploit it, see if we'd flounder. But this Valentin orchestrated the theft." Visenya's lips curled in a sneer. "We should burn Lys to the ground, show them the price of such meddling." Rhaenys frowned. "That might ignite war with the free cities. We cannot fight all of Essos at once. Our hold on Westeros is not yet absolute." Aegon considered the long term. "If we cross the narrow sea in force, we risk losing the alliances we're forging here. Yet if we ignore this threat, they might strike again. We cannot leave these warlocks free to gather their strength." In the end, he found a compromise: dispatch envoys to Lys with a stern warning, backed by a show of force along the coast, yet not a full-scale invasion. The Targaryens would watch the seas, and if any sign of renewed aggression surfaced, their dragons would visit Lys with righteous fire. It was a precarious strategy, reliant on intimidation and vigilance. But for the moment, it was all they could do. Even so, Aegon did not rest easy. He instructed that the eggs of Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, those that might someday hatch new dragons, be hidden away in secret vaults. Guards were posted around the clock for the living dragons, who remained in the new dragon pit under construction atop a hill near the budding city. The fear that once seemed unimaginable, that dragons could be stolen or killed by arcane means, now hovered over their every decision. Yet the seasons change, and with them the fortunes of men. Slowly, carefully, House Targaryen secured its grip on Westeros, forging ties through marriage, compromise, and at times brutal conquest. Lords who once spat at the notion of a Valyrian upstart now accepted him as Aegon, first of his name, king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The realm groaned under the strain of transformation, but it bent and did not break. In the final quiet days of the conquest, as winter's chill nipped at the edges of the land, Aegon stood atop the walls of the newly rising Red Keep. Beside him were his sisters. Below, the city took shape, muddy streets giving way to stone thoroughfares, small folk bustling around market stalls. Dragonstone was no longer the heart of their power. King's Landing was. The Targaryen banners flew high, the triumphant red dragon on black. Meraxes soared overhead, fully recovered, joining Balerion and Vhagar in a spiraling dance of draconic might. All three roared in harmony, a thunderous sound that reverberated over the city. People looked up in awe, some bowing, some simply marveling. In that moment, the Targaryen might appeared absolute, three dragons painting a tapestry of power across the pale winter sky. Aegon felt Rhaenys' hand slip into his. Visenya stood at his other side, her armor catching the wan light. They shared a rare smile among them, a moment of unity that seemed to transcend all the battles, betrayals, and close calls. The realm was theirs. The conquerors had prevailed. Even the theft of a dragon had not destroyed them. Yet in the back of Aegon's mind, he knew the story was not over. Somewhere across the sea, or perhaps in the darkest corners of Westeros itself, men still conspired, forging new tools to capture or kill dragons. And perhaps one day the knowledge of how to steal a dragon would emerge again. House Targaryen would remain vigilant, or so Aegon swore. His house's legacy, built on the wings of these magnificent beasts, would stand or fall on their ability to defend them. For now, though, the taste of victory was sweet. The city cheered the name Targaryen, and the dragons roared in acknowledgement. High above the Red Keep's rising spires, beneath the swirling embers of a dying sunset, Aegon turned his face to the sky, letting the thunder of wings drown out the memory of clanking chains and stolen roars. He had risked everything for this conquest. The realm was his, the dragons were his, and if the day came that fate tested him again, he would be ready. Still, in that fleeting instant of calm, he allowed himself a simple wish, that such a dark betrayal, the stealing of dragons, might never happen again. Yet history, he knew, was not so easily tamed. The seeds planted by cunning foes would sprout anew in some future age. But for now, House Targaryen stood united in triumph, each sibling balanced by the other, each dragon side by side in the sky. A new era had dawned on Westeros, one shaped by fire and blood, and ever haunted by the knowledge that even the mightiest flame casts a very dark shadow. Aegon Targaryen, king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, stood upon the highest rampart of the fledgling Red Keep, gazing out over the swelling city that had taken his name. King's Landing sprawled below, a patchwork of muddy streets and fresh stone walls, where laborers toiled from dawn to dusk. The sky was choked by the plumes of dust from new construction, the clang of hammers mingling with the constant roar of thousands of voices. In the harbor, ships of all shapes and sizes crowded the water, their sails snapping with each gust of wind. Though the city looked chaotic and half-born, a sense of momentum pulsed through it, as though each stone laid was part of an unfolding destiny. Aegon felt the breeze tugging at his Targaryen cloak, black wool trimmed in crimson, and the stiffening chill of autumn in the air. Summer was burning itself out. Soon winter would threaten the realm, though the citadel claimed it would be a short one. He narrowed his violet eyes, reflecting on all that had happened since he first set foot upon these shores. The conquest had all but succeeded. Harrenhal lay smoldering in ruin, Harren the Black entombed within its molten walls. The river lords had bent the knee. Even lords in the Vale and the Reach had begun to sue for peace rather than risk the wrath of dragons. Yet something far darker had hovered over every moment of glory: the memory of Merax's being stolen. His beloved sister Rhaenys had nearly been broken when the pale she-dragon was snatched away in the night, subdued by foreign warlocks and cunning men who called themselves the Shadow Stags. Their plan had been financed by one Tyro Valentin, a mysterious Lysene merchant noble who had harbored a vicious grudge against the Targaryens. Through dark arts and unspeakable potions, they had spirited Meraxes from the Targaryen encampment, seeking to force Aegon to renounce his claim over Westeros. But the Targaryens had reclaimed their stolen dragon, though not without scars, physical and otherwise. Meraxes still bore faint lines of damaged scale, and though she had once soared with unbridled grace, she now occasionally faltered mid-flight as if haunted by ghosts. The knowledge that a dragon could indeed be captured, if only through vile sorceries, weighed on Aegon's mind. He knew such revelations would not be easily forgotten by those who hated House Targaryen. Despite the triumphs of the conquest, a spark of uncertainty kindled in the hearts of both allies and enemies alike. He heard footsteps upon the rampart behind him. Visenya approached, clad in her dark armor, her silver-gold hair braided tightly around her head. She joined him without a word, gaze sweeping over the city below. Together, they watched as fresh levies of small folk trundled carts of quarried stone through the rudimentary gates, while teams of oxen dragged felled logs toward the hill that would someday hold the completed Red Keep. The harbor swarmed with fishermen's skiffs and merchant cogs, as well as sleek war galleys bearing the banner of House Targaryen. From time to time, roars shook the sky, Balerion and Vhagar patrolling on the wing. Meraxes, Aegon knew, still rested in the large enclosure being built on the high ground behind the keep, carefully watched by the best guards and maesters House Targaryen had at its disposal. Visenya's voice was as cold and certain as steel. The city grows by the hour, but so do whispers of subterfuge. We're hearing that certain lords question the dragon's power. Even after the ruin of Harrenhal, it seems the theft of Meraxes has stirred them. Aegon nodded. They wonder if we can truly hold the entire realm when cunning men from across the sea found ways to drug and restrain a dragon. He paused, exhaling. We must show them that any who try such treachery again will reap only destruction. Visenya's mouth set in a hard line. I'd have no qualms about giving them a demonstration. One dragon may have been stolen, but all who raised a hand against us are ash now. Let them attempt it again and see how swiftly we respond. Aegon glanced sidelong at her, sensing both her anger and her unwavering resolve. In many ways, she was the living embodiment of the conquest's ferocity, a lethal blade unsheathed. Rhaenys, by contrast, was the gentle flame, fueled by passion and empathy. Between the two sisters, Aegon sought the middle path that would preserve House Targaryen's rightful rule without drowning the realm in needless blood. Below them, an armored rider galloped through the gates, the bright points of his helm catching the last rays of sun. Aegon recognized him as one of Orys Baratheon's messengers. Orys had been dispatched to subdue the Stormlands following rumors that Argilac the Arrogant, or what remained of his loyalists, was up to some mischief. Since that warlike king's death in battle outside Storm's End, the Stormlanders had become uneasy subjects under Orys, who was rumored to share the same father as Aegon. Yet resentment ran deep in that harsh land of wind and rain. Aegon suspected that Argilac's old knights might be plotting something. We'll hear soon enough if the Stormlands remain at peace, he murmured, eyes trailing the messenger as he disappeared into the keep's courtyard. Visenya gave a small nod. If they stir rebellion, we set them straight. They must learn the price of defying us. It's that simple. Aegon hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. I agree, but we walk a fine line. Our enemies have discovered that ruthless cunning can wound us in ways that open war cannot. If we rely only on fear, We risk driving more lords into secret pacts with warlocks and foreign conspirators. We need other means to keep them loyal." Visenya frowned, but her eyes flickered with understanding. "Weddings, treaties, hostages fostered here in King's Landing, so that any betrayal would cost them what they love." Aegon's gaze returned to the city. "Yes, let them see we are not tyrants but kings and queens building a new order. If they respect it, they'll have a place at our side. If they scorn it, they'll feel the fire." Visenya said nothing more, and for a time they lingered there, silent watchers over the city that would become the heart of their dynasty. As twilight deepened, they descended from the walls to greet the messenger who had arrived from the Stormlands. In the torchlit great hall of the incomplete Red Keep, a cavernous space lined with scaffolds and half-set stone, the messenger knelt before Aegon. Soot-smudged from the road, he carried a scroll bearing Orys' seal. Aegon broke the wax and read the words by the light of an iron sconce, lips thinning as he parsed the lines. Rhaenys had joined them, wearing a flowing gown of black and red, her hair loose about her shoulders. She watched him expectantly. When Aegon finished reading, he handed the letter to Rhaenys. His voice was low and steady. "Orys reports that a dozen knights formerly loyal to Argilac have sworn themselves to a cause they call the True Storm. They claim that the Baratheons are unfit to rule Storm's End and that they would rather see the Targaryens undone. Worse, the knights have apparently received gold and other assistance from across the sea." Rhaenys' mouth turned downward. "A resurgence of the Shadow Stags? Or something akin to them?" "Possibly," Aegon said. "He also says that Storm's End is holding firm under his leadership, but the countryside bristles with unrest. These men roam from hamlet to hamlet, stirring hatred of the Dragon Kings and telling tales of how one of our beasts was stolen. They call it proof we are not chosen by the gods." Visenya exhaled through her nose. "Then we root them out, crush them before they gain a foothold." Her tone was sharp, but Rhaenys laid a calming hand on her older sister's arm. "It might be better to handle them with a show of justice, not blind wrath," Rhaenys said softly. "They are Stormlander knights, after all. Defeating them too viciously might only breed more resentment." Visenya nearly scoffed, but Aegon stepped in. "Rhaenys is correct. We must be measured. Orys will handle much of it. But we should send a message that we will not tolerate sedition, especially not if it's funded by foreign coin." They agreed on the plan. Orys would rally loyal lords, confront these rogue knights, and offer them a final chance to bend the knee. Should they refuse, there would be swift retribution. At the same time, Aegon would dispatch envoys throughout the Stormlands, offering gestures of Targaryen goodwill, lower taxes for a season, shipments of grain from the Fertile Reach. Anything to undercut the rebels' claim that House Targaryen meant only to crush them beneath a foreign yoke. In the days that followed, word of these true storm knights spread to King's Landing, fueling rumors in taverns and alleyways. The small folk repeated outlandish stories, that the knights possessed weapons akin to those rods used by the Shadow Stags, rods that crackled with unnatural power. Others whispered that a new warlock from Essos was among them, promising to replicate the theft of Meraxes. Each rumor was more sinister than the last. Meanwhile, the Targaryen spymasters and loyal bannermen kept watch on the narrow sea, scanning for the slightest sign of ships bearing black stags or other suspicious marks. For a time, none were sighted. The only suspicious news was a trickle of Lyseni vessels docking in Duskendale, apparently loaded with fineries for trade, exotic silks and casks of sweet wine. Aegon's eyebrows rose at that, recalling the name Tyro Valentin and the Lysene fascination with commerce. But trade alone was no proof of conspiracy. Rhaenys resumed her short flights on Meraxes, testing the dragon's slowly recovering strength. From the newly raised ramparts on the Hill of Rhaenys, so called in her honor, she would mount the pale dragon and circle the city, each day pushing a bit further. The city's inhabitants rushed outside to watch whenever they saw Meraxes' white silhouette rising against the dawn, many of them cheering. Children pointed and laughed in wonder. Amid that spectacle, Rhaenys felt her spirit lift. Though nightmares of the dragon's captivity still haunted her from time to time, She reminded herself that they had won Merax's back from the jaws of torment. And so long as House Targaryen held the skies, no petty conspirator could truly overshadow their might. Yet, on one of these morning flights, she saw something disquieting. As Meraxes glided south over the waters of Blackwater Bay, Rhaenys noted a cluster of ships near the coast, 3 cogs with a faint sigil on their mainsails. The design was murky at a distance, but her instincts prickled, and she urged Meraxes to descend. The dragon's wings boomed as they rushed lower, the briny sea air whipping Rhaenys' dark hair. From above, she recognized the ship's markings. Not the black stag in flames, but an unfamiliar swirl of gold and black, possibly foreign cell sails or merchantmen. Yet the men on deck reacted with alarm at the sight of Meraxes. They scrambled to hoist their sails and pick up speed. Rhaenys frowned. Typically, honest merchants were eager to hail a Targaryen dragon rider, either to show fealty or at least to ensure safe passage. These ships, by contrast, acted as though the stranger himself had appeared. She directed Meraxes to circle them, letting the pale dragon screech, a warning cry echoing across the waves. With nothing but open water ahead, the ships realized there was no easy flight from a dragon overhead. After a few tense minutes, one of them signaled a parley, waving a white banner. Rhaenys considered landing on their deck, but that was fraught with peril. Meraxes could shatter the vessel, and boarding alone might be a trap. Instead, she roared overhead and gestured imperiously for the vessel to turn and dock at King's Landing. Her gesture was unambiguous. Follow or burn. 2 of the ships complied, hoisting sails to follow the coastline toward the Targaryen harbor. The third lingered, uncertain. Meraxes hissed, exhaling a short plume of flame that splashed across the ocean surface. That was enough to chase the last ship into motion. Satisfied, Rhaenys soared back to King's Landing, swiftly dispatching a raven to the harbor watch to detain those vessels for questioning. She alighted atop the hill near the half-built dragon pit, heart pounding with adrenaline. Immediately, a cluster of Targaryen knights approached, eager for news. Rhaenys recounted her encounter, and the knights hurried to inform Aegon. By midday, the suspicious cogs arrived in the harbor, where Targaryen guards and royal officials demanded they drop anchor. A small crowd gathered at the wharf, curious to see these foreigners who had drawn Rhaenys' suspicions. The first ship's gangplank creaked down, and a wiry man in rich black and gold robes emerged, flanked by half a dozen sailors. He wore a courteous smile, but his eyes darted about with unease. At Aegon's silent signal, the guards ringed him and his men. Aegon, dressed in a simple black tunic embroidered with the 3-headed dragon, stepped forward. Visenya and Rhaenys flanked him, an imposing sight. "State your name and purpose," Aegon commanded. The crowd stilled, hushed by the tension. The wiry man bowed. "I am Belimos of Lys, my lord, a humble merchant. We carry exotic textiles and glass from Tyrosh, seeking to trade in Westeros. We had no wish to disturb your realm or your city. We only grew startled when we saw a dragon overhead." He licked his lips nervously. "We meant no offense." Rhaenys studied his face, searching for any flicker of deceit. Beside her, Visenya's hand hovered near the hilt of Dark Sister. The Lycine's words dripped with practiced politeness, but she sensed the tension in every line of his posture. "Your reaction was extreme for mere merchants," Rhaenys said softly. "Why did you attempt to flee?" Belimos managed a smile that did not touch his eyes. "We have heard rumors of raids, my lady. The seas grow dangerous. We simply feared we might be mistaken for pirates or that the dragon might attack us unprovoked." Aegon cast a glance at the second and third ship, their crews standing stiffly at the rails. "Your cargo? Show us." Belimos hesitated. "Certainly. We have crates of cloth, casks of glass beads, and some minor steel from Myr. May I show your men?" Aegon nodded, and the Targaryen guards began searching. One by one, crates were pried open, revealing indeed a bounty of cloth. Fine silks dyed in bright colors, bolts of shimmering material. Another crate held glass beads, carefully packed in straw. The men rummaged deeper. At last, they paused when they encountered small, narrow barrels sealed with wax. A guard opened one and pulled out a bundle of dried herbs. The pungent aroma made the watchers recoil. Rhaenys recognized the smell. "Shade of the evening," she said, voice tensing. She glanced sharply at Belimos. Shade of the evening was a rare hallucinogenic substance used chiefly by warlocks of Karth and, rumor said, some practitioners in the free cities. It was not commonly traded openly. Many a tale told of its uncanny effects, and of how it had been used to lull or enthrall beasts. She remembered the blackish residue around Merix's eyes when they found her in that watery cavern. Belimos raised his palms in protest. "We only carry it for medicinal uses, for certain apothecaries. It fetches a high price in some courts." "You lie," Visenya snapped, stepping closer, her eyes blazing. "This is Warlock's drink. We know too well what it can do, how it can subdue a dragon's mind if mixed with the right compounds." Belimos's confident veneer cracked. He stammered, I assure you, we had no intention." Aegon's voice cut across the wharf. "Seize him. Seize the ships. No one leaves." The guards seized Belimos and his sailors, ignoring their pleas. The crowd backed away, fear rippling through them as they realized how close they stood to a potential threat against House Targaryen. The search continued, turning up more hidden barrels of Shade of the Evening on the second and third ships, plus some curious rods of hammered metal, reminiscent of those that had crackled with arcane power in the caves where Meraxes had been held captive. That discovery sealed the Lycine's fate. Aegon signaled for more guards, who marched the merchant and his entire crew under armed escort to the dungeons of the Red Keep. The onlookers gawked, murmuring about sorcery and foreign conspiracies. That night, in the Great Hall, Aegon convened a tense council. Visenya, Rhaenys, Orys Baratheon, who had arrived from the Stormlands just that evening, and a handful of trusted knights and spymasters gathered around a long wooden table lit by torches. Outside, the keep's walls were half finished, and the place echoed with the distant sound of waves against the harbor. Aegon tapped the table with his gauntlet fingers. "The rods, the Shade of the Evening. This is no ordinary cargo. Belimos must be part of the same network that once aided the Shadow Stags. Now they try to smuggle these items into Westeros, perhaps to arm new conspirators." Orys frowned. Could this tie in to the true Storm Knights? If they're receiving foreign aid, these shipments might be their lifeblood. Rhaenys shifted uneasily. Yes, combine those rods with the knowledge that subverted Meraxes, and they might try to steal or kill another dragon, or simply sow chaos among the lords. We cannot let it happen again. Visenya's voice rumbled with anger. "Then we interrogate Belimos until he reveals every name and connection. I'll do it myself if need be." Aegon nodded. "We will, gently at first to see if he cooperates. If not, we have ways. But we must also be mindful. If we are too heavy-handed with foreign merchants, we might drive all Lycini trade underground, forcing them to operate in secret. We need to be cunning." Orys' broad shoulders tensed. "Meanwhile, the Stormlands remain on edge. I came here to report that the True Storm has been recruiting disaffected knights at a disturbing pace. A few even whisper that House Targaryen cannot protect them from cunning magic. They might be biding their time, waiting for just such contraband to tip the balance." Aegon took a deep breath. He could feel an invisible vice tightening around his ambitions. Even with 3 dragons at his beck and call, there were limits to what mere intimidation could achieve, especially when faced with men who had seen, or at least heard credible accounts of, a dragon being shackled. "We must break this conspiracy," he declared. "Root and stem. Expose Tyro Valentin if he is indeed behind this or whoever else stands at the center. Crush the True Storm, and reaffirm our power in the eyes of Westeros." When the council ended, Aegon descended with Visenya into the dungeons to oversee Belimos's initial questioning. The Lycine merchant had been stripped of his finery, left in a cell lit by a single flickering torch. The smell of mildew and old straw permeated the air. 2 guards stood at the doorway, swords at their hips. Upon seeing Aegon and Visenya approach, they bowed and stepped aside. Visenya's expression was unreadable as she entered, but her posture spoke volumes. Belimos cowered at the sight of her. His eyes darted around for an escape that did not exist. Please, lords, I am but a middleman. I know nothing of a grand conspiracy. Aegon's face was impassive. You carried warlock rods and shade of the evening into my domain. Explain yourself. I told you, Belimos said, voice quavering. I trade in rare goods. I sold to certain wealthy patrons in Lys and Myr, but when they saw the chance to expand into Westeros, they paid me handsomely to deliver these items here. Visenya leaned closer, her voice cold as death. Who are these patrons? Belimos swallowed hard, the cords of his neck standing out. I do not know their real names. They hide behind proxies, changing masks at will. One of them told me only to bring the shipments to a cove south of Storm's End, near where an older fortress lies. Their men would collect the cargo. I heard whispers that they were knights, or so they claimed. Have you heard the name Tyro Valentin? Aegon asked. His tone was calm, yet laced with an undercurrent of threat. Belimos hesitated. Yes, he said finally. He is rumored to be one of the great financiers of such illicit trade, warlock items, draconic curios, even smuggling enslaved scribes who can read ancient Valyrian texts. I did not deal with him directly, but I suspect this cargo was meant for those who serve him or who want to replicate the feats of the Shadow Stags. Visenya's hand closed around the bars. So you knowingly abetted a plot to harm our dragons? Belimos panicked. I knew only that they sought items of a certain nature. I did not ask questions. In Lys, my lady, men vanish every day for prying where they should not. I took the gold. I carried the goods. That is all. His pleas echoed off the stone walls. Aegon exchanged a look with Visenya. There was little doubt that Belimos was a small cog in a larger machine, but that hardly absolved him. The man's shipping route and knowledge of the cove south of Storm's End, however, might prove valuable. Aegon's voice was quiet, but final. You will remain here, Belimos, until we decide your fate. If you lie to us, know that there are worse things in these dungeons than you can imagine. Belimos hung his head. I will tell you all I can. They departed, leaving the merchant alone in the dark. Visenya's jaw clenched as they ascended the steps back to the keep's main corridors. We should not tarry. If these shipments were bound for the Stormlands, the conspirators will be expecting them. If they realize their goods are seized, they may flee or attempt something bolder. Aegon nodded in agreement. I will speak with Orys at once. We can coordinate a strategy to lure them into the open. If they come to that cove seeking the contraband, we will be there to greet them, and we will show them what it means to challenge House Targaryen. Within a day, the plan took shape. Under the cloak of secrecy, Aegon and Orys would deploy a fraction of their knights, and perhaps one dragon, to the Stormlands. The rest of the realm need not be alarmed. A ruse would be devised. The seized ships would set sail again, but manned by Targaryen soldiers in disguise, their lysine sails still flown. They would pretend to carry out the delivery. If the conspirators came to collect, they would walk into a trap. Rhaenys insisted on coming, but Aegon hesitated. He did not want her or Meraxes in danger, especially given the dragon's recent ordeal. Visenya, on the other hand, volunteered to bring Vhagar. She exuded a confidence that left no doubt of her readiness for a fight. With Vhagar overhead and Orys' men lying in wait, they could spring the trap. Eventually, Aegon relented to Rhaenys' plea to accompany them, but he insisted she remain more in the background, letting Visenya's formidable presence be the spearhead. Rhaenys, though reluctant, agreed. She refused to be separated from her siblings when secrets and sorceries might threaten them again. Thus, on a damp, mist-laden morning, a trio of ships bearing lysine flags departed King's Landing under the watchful eye of the city's small folk. Whispered rumors swirled that the Targaryens had seized contraband but were allowing it to move on, perhaps as part of a cunning ploy. The lysine sailors who manned the decks were in fact Targaryen soldiers handpicked for their stealth and discipline. Stowed below decks, Disguised crates contained not the actual rods and shade of the evening but worthless decoys. The real contraband had been locked away in the Red Keep's vaults, far from prying eyes. If the conspirators tried to use these false goods, they would find them inert. Meanwhile, Orys and a cadre of knights galloped overland to Storm's End, planning to rendezvous at the designated cove. Visenya rode Vagor, soaring high above the clouds to avoid detection, while Rhaenys followed at a safer altitude on mare axes, the pale dragon still cautious but growing stronger each day. The coastline of the Stormlands was harsh. Sheer cliffs battered by the roaring sea, winds howling over jagged rocks. Rain scythed down in sheets, typical of the region's moody climate. Orys welcomed the weather, reasoning that it might conceal their approach. By the time the disguised ships rounded the final promontory and dropped anchor near the cove, the sun was setting behind storm-laden clouds, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. Aegon waited with Orys and a handful of knights in a small sea cave just around the bend, out of sight from any watchers on the cliffs above. Clad in black armor, he stood near the mouth of the cave, peering out at the cove's narrow beach. The waves crashed against wet stones, the sound echoing among the rocks. Behind him, in the gloom, the knights waited tensely with swords half-drawn, eyes flicking to their king for direction. Visenya circled overhead on Vagor, hidden above the darkening cloud cover. Rhaenys and Meraxes hovered a short distance behind, not quite as high, but still veiled by the dense, rolling storm clouds. Only faint roars or the beat of wings betrayed their presence. Aegon's plan was to remain near the ground until the conspirators showed themselves, then signal the dragons to descend. To ensure that no one slipped away, Orys had posted pickets along every footpath up the cliffs. Darkness thickened, broken only by the occasional flicker of distant lightning. The Lysene ships bobbed on the unsettled waters, lanterns swaying, their false crew waiting. Now and again, a lookout on board signaled to Aegon's hidden men on shore with a hooded lantern. They had spotted no immediate signs of approach. Aegon began to wonder if the conspirators had caught wind of the trap. The hours crawled by, each wave a rhythmic taunt, each roll of thunder a jolt of anticipation. Then, near midnight, movement appeared. A solitary torch bobbed at the top of the cliff path, descending carefully. Soon, more torches appeared behind it, forming a small procession. Aegon narrowed his eyes, stepping back deeper into the cave to ensure he wasn't seen. He counted at least a dozen men, possibly more. The flickering light cast long shadows across the wet sand as they finally reached the foot of the cliffs. Wind tore at their cloaks, muffling voices, but Aegon could make out some words carried by the breeze: Storm's End, Targaryen, cargo. His heart beat faster. This was them. The men advanced onto the beach. At their head stood a figure in plate armor with a stag sigil, though not the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Instead, the device was an older style. An unadorned stag, black on a field of gray, though smudged or overpainted in places. Another figure, wearing robes despite the driving rain, walked beside him. This robed individual held a staff topped with some dark crystal that glimmered when lightning flashed overhead. A hush fell as they approached the water's edge, where the disguised Lysene sailors lowered a gangplank from their anchored ship to a small skiff. Aegon signaled Orys with a subtle hand motion. Orys nodded, gripping the hilt of his sword, his eyes dark with determination. The Targaryen knights readied themselves. Closer. Let them wade in, confident they had the advantage. The leader in plate armor raised his visor, revealing a face marred by old scars across the temple. He called out, "Are you the Lyseni from Belimos's crew?" The robed figure held the staff high, scanning the shadows on the water. A disguised Targaryen soldier, wearing a borrowed Lysene cap, answered from the skiff. "We have your cargo, warlock rods and the brew you requested. But we almost turned back. These coasts are treacherous. Where is our payment?" A pause. Then the robed figure lowered the staff, producing a small pouch that clinked with coin. "Silver and gold as promised. We must confirm the contents before finalizing the deal." One of the conspirators stepped forward, scanning the surrounding darkness. "Hurry, we don't want to linger here." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the waves in a ghostly glow. Aegon used that flash to gauge the numbers. Close to 20 men on the beach, plus some additional shapes halfway up the cliff path. Possibly archers. He clenched his jaw. If they waited too long, the conspirators might realize the cargo was decoy or suspect the trap. The next crash of thunder shook the cliffs, and Aegon decided the time was nigh. He strode from the cave with Orys and a dozen Targaryen knights, swords gleaming in the pulses of lightning. They moved quickly across the wet stones, fanning out to cut off any retreat. At the same moment, Visenya signaled from above. Vagor roared, piercing the storm's gloom, and the silhouettes of 2 dragons descended toward the cove, their eyes glowing in the flashes of lightning. Shouts of alarm erupted. The conspirators scrambled, some reaching for weapons, others trying to retreat up the cliff path. "Stand where you are," Orys thundered. His blade caught the torchlight. "In the name of King Aegon Targaryen, lay down your arms or face Dragonfire." The leader in the scarred helm spat. "Targaryen dogs." He spun, the waves lapping at his ankles, as a half-dozen of his men drew swords or spears. Arrows whistled from the path above, but the swirling winds deflected many, and Orys' knights raised shields. The robed figure, brandishing the dark crystal staff, chanted something, a harsh, guttural phrase. Sparks crackled around the staff's tip, reminiscent of the arcane rods once used by the shadow stags. A bolt of eerie greenish light arced toward Aegon's knights, striking one in the chest. The knight cried out, thrown back as if a warhammer had hit him. Shock rippled through the Targaryen lines. "Take him," Aegon barked, rushing forward. The beach churned underfoot, pebbles and sand slipping in the tide. Orys led a charge of knights, colliding with the conspirators in a clash of steel. Screams and the thunder of waves merged into a frenzy. Aegon pressed toward the robed warlock, black fire flashing in the intermittent light. Another bolt of green lightning shot from the staff, grazing Aegon's shoulder plate, burning the leather beneath and numbing his arm. Gritting his teeth, Aegon pushed on. He raised Blackfire in a swift arc. The robed figure tried to parry with the staff, but the Valyrian steel severed it in two, eliciting a shriek from the warlock. The tip of Aegon's sword found flesh, and the robed figure collapsed in the surf, the staff fragments sputtering with dying magic. Arrows rained down from the cliffs. One took a Targaryen knight in the throat, pitching him backward, gargling. Another grazed Orys' arm. But then the sky lit with flame as Vagor descended, Visenya astride her. The great she-dragon's maw opened, belching a cascade of fire that licked the cliff face. Screams echoed as archers scattered, some consumed by the sudden inferno. Mare axes followed, unleashing a shorter but still potent gout of flame on the hillside. The tide of the fight shifted in an instant, yet the scarred-helmed knight remained defiant. He roared, "For the true storm!" and flung himself at Orys. Steel rang on steel, the knight's sword battered aside by Orys' savage blows. But the scarred man was formidable, quick despite the weight of his armor. He lunged beneath Orys' guard, slicing a deep line in Orys' thigh. Orys stumbled, cursing. Before the knight could finish him, Aegon sprang forward. Blackfire knocked the man's blade aside, and with a pivot, Aegon drove the point through the gap of the knight's gorget. The man choked, blood spilling down his breastplate. He sagged to his knees, eyes blazing with hatred until they glazed over. Orys panted, leaning on his sword, while Targaryen knights closed in around them. The remaining conspirators on the beach broke ranks, trying to flee. Some splashed into the surf in a desperate attempt to swim to safety. Others dashed for the cliffs, only to be met by more Targaryen men-at-arms blocking the path. The archers who had not already burned tried to scramble higher, but Visenya's vantage atop Vagor was absolute. Another plume of dragonfire roiled across the rocky slope, and the conspirators' screams were lost in the tempest. Soon, the cove smelled of charred cloth, burnt hair, and the metallic tang of blood. When the battle's uproar subsided, The only sounds were the crashing waves and the labored breathing of the victors. The beach was littered with bodies, some half-submerged, others sprawled across the stones. Lightning flashed again, revealing the destruction in stark relief. Aegon stood in the shallows, panting, water swilling around his boots. He scanned the cove for any sign of survivors who might yield intelligence. Orys, limping from his wound, beckoned Targaryen knights to gather up the living conspirators. "Find me one who can still speak," Orys said, grimacing with pain. Eventually, they dragged over a young man who had been struck across the face, blood trickling from a broken cheekbone. He coughed salt water, spluttering. One of Aegon's knights shoved him to his knees in the shallows. Rhaenys landed nearby on mare axes, the pale dragon letting out a snarl that set the prisoner quaking. Aegon lifted the prisoner's chin with the tip of Blackfire. "You dare call yourself the true storm? Answer me. Who leads you? Where did your coin come from?" The man choked on his words. "We fight for Argella, the rightful Storm Queen. She hates you Targaryens for killing her father." Aegon glanced at Orys, remembering Argella, Argilax's daughter, who had once refused to yield Storm's End until Orys took the castle and Argella was forced to bend the knee. Aegon had spared her, allowing Orys to wed her in an attempt to unify the Stormlands. By some accounts, that marriage had been rocky at first, but rumor said Argella had eventually grown to respect Orys, or at least accept her place. Yet it seemed not all Stormlanders had accepted it. Some still rallied to Argella's old claim. Perhaps Argella herself harbored resentments. Still, the mention of foreign coin overshadowed the Stormlander grievance. But what of these rods, the warlock's involvement? Rhaenys demanded, dismounting from mare axes. Rain slicked her hair against her cheeks, her eyes cold. "They came to us," the prisoner murmured, "said we had the same cause, to rid Westeros of your dragons. They offered us gold, weapons, spells. We only needed to help them land shipments in the Stormlands, see them distributed." Visenya swooped down astride Vhagar, the red glow of the dying fires lighting her fearsome silhouette. Who were they? Lysene? Or more? Different men, some from Lys, some from Myr. One said he spoke for Tyro Valentin. Another claimed to serve the Red Priests, though I saw no proof of that. They demanded only that we see to it the cargo was kept secret and used at the right moment. The prisoner coughed, tears mixing with blood and rain. "We didn't know if it would truly let us capture a dragon again, but the rumor alone drew many to our cause." Aegon let out a slow breath. So it was confirmed. The true storm had allied with foreign conspirators, all funneling resources to replicate the theft of mare axes or otherwise sabotage House Targaryen's conquest. The same vile web of plots extended beyond a single group. Indeed, it seemed Tyro Valentin and his associates were determined to undermine Targaryen rule by any means. He signaled the knights to haul the prisoner away. Then he turned to Orys, whose wound needed attention. "We'll root out the rest," he said softly. "But first, let's see to your leg." Orys grunted, leaning on a knight's shoulder. "Just a scratch. I've had worse." Still, blood seeped through his breeches. Rhaenys guided him gently to a drier patch of sand, kneeling to examine the cut. Rain battered them without mercy, flattening Rhaenys' hair to her head, dripping down Orys' face. The pale circle of Merryx's body loomed above them, the dragon stooping to sniff the air suspiciously. Visenya stood with Aegon, her armor glinting wetly in the random flickers of lightning. She nudged a lifeless warlock staff with her boot. The severed tip fizzled as water dripped across its crystal. "We've halted one shipment, destroyed one band of conspirators," she said. "But how many others wait across the narrow sea, forging more rods, more potions?" Aegon's stomach tightened. "It's a question that haunts me nightly, sister. So long as Tyro Valentin draws breath, I fear he will keep pouring coin into these efforts." They convened under a rocky overhang while the knights gathered the dead. Soon, the tide would wash many corpses away, but the Targaryens needed only a few for proof of this conspiracy. Aegon huddled with his sisters, the howling wind forming a shroud of noise around them. Rhaenys expressed a desire to track down Tyro Valentin in Lys to end this threat at its source. Visenya agreed wholeheartedly, but Aegon was torn. Invading Lys might provoke a war with the Free Cities. The realm was not fully at peace. Though the Seven Kingdoms were nearly all bowed to him, Dorne remained unconquered, the Iron Islands still rebellious, and rebellious pockets like the True Storm lingered within the Stormlands. Yet inaction courted danger. Another attempt to steal or slay a dragon might come at any time, from any corner. The possibility gnawed at him. It was Rhaenys who posed a question that struck him deeply. If we do not stamp out the threat, how can we ever rule from a place of confidence and stability? The earnest worry in her eyes reminded him of Merryx's captivity. Once more, he felt that surge of protectiveness for the dragons, and for his family. We'll see what more Belimos can tell us after hearing of this ambush, Aegon decided. Then, if we must cross the sea to deal with Valentin, we do so carefully. A small, swift strike, not an all-out war with Lys. Perhaps subterfuge of our own. But first, we must ensure the Stormlands are truly pacified. Lightning illuminated the cove one last time as they made their exit. The gutted band of conspirators left to face Targaryen justice. The battered ships from King's Landing hoisted sails in the gale, and the knights, though tired and bruised, departed with grim satisfaction. Above, Vhagar and Merax's sword, watchful guardians under a storm-torn sky. Aegon wondered how many more nights he would spend chasing shadows, each move a countermove to some hidden puppet master across the sea. The weight of kingship bore down on him heavier than any sword or shield. They reached Storm's End in the next day's gloom, greeted by the fortress's massive curtain walls and the tempestuous skies that never seemed to relent. Argella Baratheon, once Argella Durendon, met them in the Great Hall, tension showing on her sharp features. She was a proud woman who had never fully forgiven Aegon for the death of her father, Argilac the Arrogant, even if she had consented to wed Orys. Her black hair was braided in a severe style, and she wore the heraldry of House Baratheon with reluctant acceptance. "Is it done?" she asked, eyes flicking to Orys' bandaged thigh. Orys offered a curt nod. "Their conspirators are dead or captured. The true storm is shattered. We found a warlock among them, same as those who stole Merax's." Argella's expression remained guarded. She spared a glance at Aegon and the Targaryen sisters. "Then perhaps we can have peace in my father's lands at last." Her tone carried a faint accusation, as if the Targaryen's presence was a perpetual cause of strife. Aegon did not miss the glare in her dark eyes. He met them calmly. Orys sighed, stepping forward to speak quietly. "The realm changes, Argella. Let us be allies in truth, not merely in name. These men who claimed your father's blood also conspired with foreign sorcerers. Their loyalty was never truly to you or the Stormlands." She nodded, the tightness in her jaw easing. "I know. Their talk of Argilac's legacy was but a veneer for their hatred of dragons. It's time we move on from that bitterness, or it will devour us." She reached for Orys' arm, as if to test the sincerity of her new husband's words. In that small gesture, Aegon saw the faint bridging of old grudges. He inclined his head, content to see that at least some measure of unity could be salvaged in the Stormlands. They lingered at Storm's End for several nights, giving Orys time to recover from his wound, and to let the battered knights rest. The thick-walled castle thundered with every gale, but it served as a sturdy refuge from the swirling storms outside. Argella remained distant but polite. Whenever Rhaenys or Visenya tried to speak with her, she answered stiffly, never quite meeting their eyes. At dinners, she kept to formalities, ignoring the presence of dragons outside the castle's high walls. Aegon supposed it would take years for Argella to fully bury her father's memory, if ever. On the morning they prepared to depart for King's Landing, a raven arrived from the royal capital. The message, written in a hasty scrawl, said that Belimos the Lysene prisoner had come forth with further names and confessions. Under stern questioning, he had revealed that Tyro Valentin was indeed one of the major financiers behind the anti-dragon conspiracies, funneling gold through a network of bravos and warlocks. The letter also indicated that Valentin's associates were rumored to operate from a hidden stronghold on the island of Illyria off the coast of Lys, a place seldom visited by outsiders. The rumor was that new rods, potions, and perhaps even greater weapons against dragons were in development there, all with Valentin's coin. Visenya reacted with immediate anger. "Then we should fly there and burn it to cinders," she said, rolling the letter in her fist. "Let them learn the cost of defying us." Rhaenys wore a pensive look. "And risk a war with Lys? They might gather a fleet, call upon allies in Myr or Tyrosh. We have not yet dealt with the Iron Islands or Dorne. We could be overextending ourselves." Aegon weighed both arguments. "We cannot let them continue unchallenged. But a stealthy approach might be wiser than open war. A small strike force, dragons overhead, chosen men below, could slip onto the island, find their stronghold, and destroy everything related to these vile conjurations." Visenya's eyes gleamed. "Yes, hit them hard, fast. Take Valentin alive if possible. Slay him if he resists. That will send a stronger message than any threat." Rhaenys took a breath, her expression conflicted. "We must be sure Meraxes is ready for a sea crossing so soon after her ordeal." Aegon nodded. "We'll only bring 2 dragons. Balerion for might and perhaps Vhagar or Meraxes for support. I cannot leave the realm entirely unguarded. 1 dragon must remain to watch over King's Landing, lest some new attempt be made here." They debated well into the day, eventually deciding that Rhaenys and Meraxes would remain behind this time, continuing to strengthen the Pale Dragon while guarding the capital in case any conspirators emerged to wreak havoc. Visenya, with Vhagar's lethal might, would accompany Aegon on Balerion, along with a fleet of 12 ships carrying knights and war-ready men. Orys would stay in the Stormlands to consolidate his hold. Argella might bristle at the reminder that her husband governed in the Targaryen's name, but if more pockets of the true storm lingered, Orys was best suited to quell them. By dusk, the Targaryens left Storm's End with that plan in mind, returning to King's Landing. Meraxes greeted them on arrival, letting out a rolling call as she circled the Red Keep spires. Balerion roared back, spooking gulls into frantic flight over the harbor. That night, Aegon and Visenya made arrangements to depart for Illyria within 3 days. They summoned loyal lords from the Crownlands, outfitted the ships with extra provisions, and entrusted Rhaenys to oversee the city in their absence. Rhaenys, though concerned, agreed, understanding the importance of stamping out the threat at its root. On the eve of their departure, Aegon walked alone along the half-finished ramparts of the Red Keep, gazing upon his city. The laborers' torches flickered below, revealing the incomplete walls, the heavy stones waiting to be set. Beyond, the still waters of Blackwater Bay glimmered in the faint moonlight. Out there, he knew, were merchants from the free cities, some honest, some perhaps spies. Across that water lay Lys, Myr, Volantis, powers with their own ambitions and hatreds. He recalled his boyhood in Dragonstone, reading old Valyrian tomes that spoke of the doom of old Valyria, how the proudest empire in the world was swallowed by fire and ash when unthinkable cataclysm struck. Even the mightiest dragons had perished in that chaos. Aegon wondered if the seeds of such doom had taken root here, in his new kingdom, in the guise of men like Tyro Valentin. Could black sorcery or cunning weapons spark a cataclysm for House Targaryen? No, he resolved. He would not let that happen. The theft of Meraxes had been a rude awakening, but from that wound, House Targaryen had learned to be vigilant, to blend might with caution. With Balerion under him and Visenya by his side, he would cross the sea and annihilate whatever vile nest of conspirators thrived on that island of Illyria. Let them see the true fury of dragons, fire that not even warlock rods could quell. The morning sun broke over King's Landing, gilding the harbor as the small Targaryen flotilla set sail. At the prow of the lead ship, Aegon stood in black armor, his cloak snapping in the breeze. Balerion flew overhead, a titan in the sky, casting a vast shadow across the water. At his flank soared Vhagar, Visenya perched with regal poise. The city's folk lined the docks, cheering, though many wore expressions of mingled awe and worry. Rumors had spread that the king was taking the battle to far-off Lys. The small folk had never known the Targaryens to fight outside Westeros before, and none could predict what dangers the seas or the foreign powers might hold. Rhaenys stood on a balcony of the Red Keep, a slender figure in black and red, watching the ships until they shrank to specks on the horizon. Meraxes roost near her, the pale dragon's eyes gleaming with an unspoken longing for flight. Rhaenys rested a hand on the beast's flank, whispering quiet words of reassurance. She felt anxiety gnawing at her, recalling the last time they had parted ways, and how it had nearly cost Meraxes her freedom, or even her life. But she reminded herself that they were stronger now, armed with knowledge of their enemy's methods. Whatever Tyro Valentin or his warlocks might attempt, Aegon and Visenya would not be caught unawares. Days turned to nights at sea. The Targaryen fleet cut through calm waters at first, escorted by Balerion and Vhagar in the skies. Every so often, they encountered merchant galleys that veered wide, sails trembling in fear of the dragons overhead. The nights were quiet, punctuated by the flutter of sails and the hush of the sea. Aegon slept lightly, always half expecting an attack. When they reached the open waters beyond the stepstones, the weather turned foul. Wind whipped up white-capped waves, rocking the ships so badly that many knights retched over the rails. Balerion roared in protest, forced to seek higher altitudes to avoid the gale. Vhagar followed, though each flap of her wings churned misty sheets of rain. For 2 full days, the Targaryen fleet battled the storm, the masts creaking ominously, the timbers straining under the onslaught. Aegon, though not a seasoned sailor, stood resolute on deck, setting an example for his men. Visenya circled overhead as best she could, though even for a dragon, the lashing squalls posed a challenge. At last, the storm passed, revealing a pale sunrise. The battered fleet reformed, the losses minimal. A few cracked spars, a torn sail or two, but no sunken vessels. Aegon thanked the gods, suspecting that the seeds of old Valyria might yet watch over him. After some hasty repairs, they resumed their course. By the following dusk, the silhouettes of Lys's outskirts appeared on the horizon, a shimmer of distant lights. On a smaller island to the east, they spied a jagged, hilly shape that, the navigators said, must be Illyria. They dropped anchor in a secluded inlet on a neighboring islet to avoid detection. Visenya perched Vhagar behind a craggy ridge, while Balerion landed thunderously on a stretch of stony beach, sending waves crashing up over the dragon's black claws. Under the fading light, Aegon and Visenya conferred with their knights. Illyria, according to Belimos's forced testimony, held a hidden fortress in a cove on its western shore. Cloaked in thick vegetation and rocky outcrops, it was seldom visited by Lysene authorities, if indeed the Lysene government even disapproved of Valentin's activities. For all Aegon knew, some Lysene magisters might secretly support the conspiracy. Thus, stealth was paramount. They would sail under cover of darkness around the island, come ashore near that cove, and if the fortress lay as described, they would infiltrate with their ground forces. Once the fortress was located, the dragons would do what dragons did best: reduce it to ash if it harbored these conspirators and their cursed warlock experiments. Capture Tyro Valentin if possible, kill him if not. No war, no quarter. A swift, devastating blow to the heart of the scheme. The plan set, they waited for night to deepen, the men passing the time in hushed readiness, checking weapons and whispering prayers. Aegon stood near Balerion's massive flank, stroking the dragon's scales. In the moonlight, the black drake looked carved from obsidian, his golden eyes flickering with ancient intelligence. Aegon recalled the first time he had mounted Balerion on Dragonstone, feeling that rush of raw power at his command. But now, experience had taught him that might alone wasn't enough. Cunning and vigilance were just as vital. He murmured a promise to Balerion. "We will end this threat to our blood. By daybreak, let them tremble." Visenya mounted Vhagar, lifting off silently into the starry sky. Aegon returned to the flagship, from which he would direct the approach by sea. The small flotilla, sails dyed dark for this mission, slipped around the cape, hugging the coastline of Illyria. Moonlight revealed cliffs riddled with caves and gnarled vegetation. Occasional flickers of torchlight suggested watch posts or fishing hamlets, but they kept their distance, wrapping themselves in the cloak of the moonless night. At last, the cove came into view. The water glittered faintly against a narrow beach overshadowed by steep slopes. A ruined tower stood sentinel atop the cliff, battered by centuries of salt and wind. The fortress, if it existed, would be hidden beyond the next ridge, behind thick jungle or brush. The Targaryen ships dropped anchor carefully. The men lowered boats, and a small force waded ashore. Aegon wore black mail, blackfire sheathed at his hip, moving with the determined quiet of a commander who knew the difference between victory and disaster could be a single misstep. He signaled his men forward into the underbrush, the night alive with insect drones and the rustle of leaves. They followed a faint path climbing away from the beach, winding between rocky outcroppings. Without torches, they relied on the moonlight filtering through twisted trees. The air was thick with humidity, quite unlike the bracing breezes of Westeros. Aegon's senses prickled. He felt as though countless eyes might lurk in the darkness. They encountered the first sentry near a crooked palm, a Lysine man in dark leathers, blinking in surprise at the sight of armed figures emerging from the gloom. He opened his mouth to shout, but a Targaryen knight's dagger found his throat, dispatching him with minimal noise. They pressed on, stepping over the body. Another sentry perched atop a low crag, scanning the cove with a lantern. Visenya took him from behind. He had no time to scream. Ahead, perched in a hollow of the ridge, a stone structure emerged from the dense foliage. By the faint glow of hidden torches within, it looked large enough to house dozens of men, likely a mix of old fortress and refurbished smuggler's keep. A short wall, more of a barricade, ran around its perimeter. A half-ruined gatehouse yawned in the darkness, guarded by two men near braziers. Beyond, Aegon glimpsed the flicker of lights dancing on the stone, and he heard distant chanting, warlocks at work, or something akin to it. He gestured to his knights, splitting them into two groups. One would circle around to the south, the other to the north, converging on the gatehouse simultaneously. Meanwhile, Balerion and Vhagar would remain hidden until a signal. The Targaryens wanted to slip inside, open the fortress from within, and only then unleash the dragons if necessary. Swift, surgical. Aegon pressed forward with the northern group, creeping closer to the gatehouse. The chanting echoed louder now, underscored by a low, resonant hum that set his teeth on edge. At the crucial moment, they lunged from the darkness. The guards tried to raise an alarm, but Targaryen steel cut them down. Aegon and his men flooded through the gatehouse, surprising a cluster of unsuspecting rogues wearing Lysine or Myrish garb. Shouts rang out. At once, the fortress erupted with chaos. Men grabbing spears, crossbows, rods that sparked in weird colors. Warlocks in tattered robes scurried out from shadowed corridors, chanting frantically. A swirl of illusions and flickers of ominous light coursed through the air, making the stone walls shimmer as if alive. Aegon led the charge, cutting down the first warlock he encountered, the man's staff clattering to the ground in a shower of green sparks. Another brandished a rod that spat a jolt of energy, scorching a Targaryen knight. The smell of burnt flesh rose. Aegon roared, surging forward, hooking blackfire under the warlock's ribs. Blood sprayed the stone floor. From the fortress's deeper halls, more conspirators poured forth. Hired sellswords, bravos from the free cities, and robed men with arcane symbols. The Targaryens found themselves in a swirling melee, swords clashing with unnatural energies. The corridor lit up in pulses of green and purple flame. Screams rebounded off the walls. Aegon spied a well-dressed Lysine in the corridor, a man wearing an embroidered doublet of black and gold. He had a ring set with an opal on each finger, and he barked orders to the sellswords. Protect the labs. Kill them all. This might be Tyro Valentin himself or one of his top lieutenants. Aegon pushed through the melee, crossing steel with bravos who tried to bar his path. One swung a curved blade with lethal speed. Aegon parried, the clang of metal resonating. He pivoted, driving an armored elbow into the man's face. The bravo stumbled, and Aegon finished him with a downward slice. "Volentin!" he shouted, voice echoing. "Surrender or die!" But the richly dressed Lysine retreated into a side passage, vanishing amid the swirl of panicked men. Aegon cursed, pressing forward, cutting down another foe. Behind him, Targaryen knights battered aside the last defenders at the gate, allowing more of their force to pour in. He gave the signal, a short blast on a horn. Outside, the night sky erupted with the roar of dragons. The fortress walls trembled as Balerion and Vhagar descended with fury in their eyes. Visenya perched in a vantage above the courtyard, breathing a column of flame that set wooden scaffolds ablaze. Balerion's roar shook the stones, and a wave of terror swept the conspirators. Some flung down their weapons, others fled deeper into the fortress. The illusions and arcane flickers faltered, warlocks losing concentration in the face of overwhelming fear. Aegon carved a path through the twisting corridors, searching for Volentin or a central chamber. He came upon a heavy wooden door guarded by two black-clad sellswords. Before they could react, he lunged, lopping off the arm of one, then smashing the other's head into the wall. He kicked in the door. Inside, a wide chamber stank of chemicals and incense. Tables were piled high with glassware, vials of thick liquids, coils of rods, and half-written tomes in Valyrian script. Warlocks cowered near the walls, shrieking. Several large metal cages stood empty, shaped as if for beasts. This must be the laboratory where they planned some new attempt at capturing dragons. Aegon felt a surge of rage. Near the rear of the chamber, the well-dressed Lysine from before rummaged desperately among the tables, as if searching for something. Another warlock, older and hunched, hovered at his shoulder. The Lysine's hair hung in disarray around his face. He looked up at Aegon's arrival, eyes wide with fear. "Stay back!" he shouted, snatching a rod from the table. It sparked with a savage blue energy. The old warlock began chanting, palm outstretched. A sickly aura of purple gloom spread from his fingertips. Aegon forced himself forward, blackfire raised. Each step felt heavy, as though wading through a quagmire of nightmares. The aura pressed against his mind, threatening illusions. But he braced himself with the flame in his blood, the heritage of old Valyria, the bond with Balerion. He pushed through. The Lysine slashed the rod at him. A bolt of lightning crackled, singing Aegon's cloak. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain, and swung Blackfire in a deadly arc. The blade connected with the rod, snapping it in two in a flash of sparks. Then it continued on, biting into the man's chest. The Lysine crumpled with a scream. Whether it was Tyro Volentin or another, Aegon could not say, but the man was richly dressed enough to be important. The old warlock shrieked, backing away. Aegon pivoted to face him, sword dripping blood. The warlock flung out a bony hand, sending a swirl of dark illusions that took the shape of writhing serpents. Aegon's vision blurred, serpents everywhere, fangs snapping. He staggered, fighting the panic. Then he heard a roar from outside Balerion, and the illusions wavered. Aegon slashed at the warlock, the Valyrian steel blade slicing through ephemeral snakes and into the warlock's chest. The man crumpled, mouth twisted in silent horror. Panting, Aegon surveyed the chamber. The air reeked of burnt hair and noxious brews. On the tables, glowing vials threatened to tip and spill. Some had the same blackish color Rhaenys had described, a deeper variant of Shade of the Evening. Others crackled with faint arcs of energy. He realized these were prototypes for the rods that had once subdued Meraxes. If used correctly, they might replicate the effect or even create a worse horror. He strode to the largest table and, with a cry of disgust, swept it clean. Glass shattered on the stone floor, liquids hissing and steaming. A wave of acrid fumes rose. Aegon coughed and covered his mouth, but the act gave him savage satisfaction. This would not remain to endanger House Targaryen. He ran to the next table, overturning it, ignoring the crackle of shattered vials. The warlocks cowering by the walls tried to slink away, but Targaryen knights came in, capturing or killing them. Soon, the chamber was a ruin of broken glass and fizzing chemicals. Outside, the fortress itself was aflame. Through the open door, Aegon caught glimpses of Balerian's black silhouette as he unleashed waves of fire upon the courtyard. Men screamed. Stone glowed orange in the infernal heat. Visenya soared overhead, systematically torching each tower to ensure none escaped. The entire stronghold was collapsing into a siege of dragonfire. Aegon turned as two knights dragged in a captive from the corridor. It was the well-dressed Lysene with the gash in his chest, still alive, though barely. He gazed at Aegon with hatred. You do not understand," he rasped, coughing blood. "Volentin will continue, others. Across the sea, unstoppable." Aegon grabbed him by the collar. "Are you Tyro Volentin?" A rictus grin twisted the man's face. "No, I am Sabaro, his cousin. You've gained nothing." He sagged, life draining from him. One last groan and his eyes slid shut. Aegon let him drop. So the infamous Tyro Volentin was not here after all. This was only one branch of the Hydra. Still, they had torn out a major root. The fortress was destroyed, the warlocks scattered or slain, and the contraband in flames. Aegon looked to the knights. "We burn it all," he said. "Leave no trace of their cursed craft." They pulled back from the chamber, letting the flames spread unchecked. As the conflagration raged, Aegon emerged into the courtyard, his armor slick with sweat and blood. The heat pressed against him like a living thing. More Targaryen knights rallied around him, their faces smudged with soot. Bodies littered the ground, both conspirators and Targaryen fallen. Above, Balerion roared, launching skyward on colossal wings. Vhagar soared on the opposite side of the fortress, belching fire at any last pockets of resistance. The screams had mostly ceased, replaced by the roar of flame and the groan of collapsing STO. Aegon and his men retreated down the slope toward the cove, the flames painting the night sky with eerie reds and oranges. The stronghold's crumbling ramparts were soon swallowed by the inferno. As they reached the beach, they spotted the Targaryen ships waiting in the shallows, knights aboard them cheering at the sight of victory. Aegon looked over his shoulder at the blazing fortress, the roiling smoke a monument to the Targaryen retribution. He felt no joy in it, only grim resolve. Volentin might remain at large, but at least one nest of scorpions had been crushed. Dawn found the Targaryen fleet sailing away from Illyria, leaving the smoldering ruin behind. Visenya flew close beside Aegon's ship, Vhagar's wings stirring the early morning light. Her expression was determined, but a flicker of disappointment danced in her eyes. "We did not find Volentin," she called over the wind. Aegon nodded heavily. "He'll hear of this. It may drive him into hiding or provoke him to further madness. Either way, we've shown that we will not stand idle. He will think twice before sending warlocks against us," Visenya said. Then she paused, a look of curiosity crossing her face. "But do you think fear alone will halt him?" Aegon glanced back at the shoreline receding into the distance. "No. Men consumed by vengeance rarely yield to fear, but we have ravaged his arsenal. Every day that passes, we learn more of his methods and we stand ready. He'll find no easy victory." They pressed on across the open sea, the men exhausted but victorious. The crossing was mercifully calm, the skies clear. Now and again, they glimpsed Lys on the horizon, a glittering city of marble spires and domes. Aegon knew it might become a battleground if Volentin made his move, but that was a future concern. For now, he held to the knowledge that they had routed one of Volentin's strongholds. They would return to Westeros, ensuring that the realm saw House Targaryen's readiness to mete out swift, decisive punishment on any threat. Yes, the dragons had once been stolen, but the dragons yet endured, and so did the house that rode them. When they entered Blackwater Bay, the City of King's Landing greeted them with new spires rising from the Red Keep and the Dragon Pit. On the walls, Targaryen banners flapped in the sea breeze. Rhaenys awaited them at the docks, mare axes perched on a bluff behind. She hurried forward as Aegon disembarked, scanning him anxiously for wounds. He embraced her, ignoring the stares of the crowd. She breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing he was whole, though the blood and sweat on his armor told a story of violence. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. "For now," Aegon said. "But Tyro Valentin was not there. We destroyed his fortress and slew his warlocks, but he remains at large." He paused. "We found evidence that they were preparing even more vile methods to use against our dragons." Rhaenys swallowed hard, exchanging a glance with Meraxes in the distance. "Then we must remain vigilant. The realm must remain vigilant." It was a truth they all had to accept. The stolen dragon had proven Targaryen power was not unassailable. Even in the wake of the conquest, nearly all 7 kingdoms bent, with only Dorne and pockets of rebellion left. House Targaryen's greatest triumph was tempered by the knowledge that cunning and magic could wound them. But from that wound, Aegon had forged a sharper edge. He would not allow conspirators like Tyro Valentin to unravel what he had built. One day, if need be, he would cross the sea again, or dispatch assassins, or do whatever was required to safeguard the dragons and the kingdom they now symbolized. In the weeks that followed their return, word spread swiftly of the Targaryens' strike on Illyria. Merchants whispered of a great fortress destroyed overnight, of warlocks burned alive, of Lysene trade ships that vanished under Targaryen watch. The effect was immediate. New shipments of the suspicious rods or potions ceased. Belimos, still rotting in the Red Keep's dungeons, heard the news and sank into despair. He realized his web of business contacts in Lys was in disarray, and so he offered further cooperation, hoping for leniency. Yet Aegon's patience with him was thin. Meantime, the lords of Westeros, hearing of Aegon's triumphant return, offered more fealty than ever. The knowledge that the Targaryens could sail into Essos and devastate an enemy's stronghold with dragonfire only added to their legend. Even the cynics who had used Meraxes' theft as proof of Targaryen weakness now found themselves hushed. The story changed. Yes, a dragon could be stolen, but the thieves would be hunted to the ends of the earth by the unstoppable might of House Targaryen. And so, ironically, from that painful wound came a new cloak of dread that draped the Targaryen name. Yet Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys knew better than to indulge complacency. They strengthened the guard around the dragons, expanded their network of spies across the narrow sea, and began forging new alliances with those in Myr, Pentos, and Bravos who disliked Lys's ambitions. Each small step added a layer of protection. Meanwhile, the forging of the 7 kingdoms continued. In the west, House Lannister bent the knee. The Reach had yielded after the Field of Fire. Dorne alone stood unconquered, defiant as always. Some at court whispered that Dorne might soon ally with Valentin or other enemies to strike at the Targaryens' vulnerability. The seeds of conflict thus continued to sprout in corners near and far. But day by day, the city of King's Landing grew, and the Red Keep rose from the rocky hill, a testament to House Targaryen's will. The dragon pit on the Hill of Rhaenys took shape as a grand enclosure for their winged beasts, offering both shelter and security. Common folk thronged the markets, praising or cursing the new order in equal measure. Gangs of sellswords wandered the streets, hoping for employment from either rebellious lords or the crown. Through it all, the unspoken question pulsed. Would the Targaryens truly bring lasting peace, or would their enemies' cunning forever dog their steps? In time, the rumors about Tyro Valentin quieted, though they never fully died. Some said he had fled west, seeking refuge in Pentos or Bravos. Others claimed he had gone underground in Lys, entrenching himself among the city's powerful courtesans and magisters. A few insisted he was searching for another warlock circle in distant Karth. Aegon listened to every report with stern focus, refusing to dismiss any possibility. He learned from Rhaenys' heartbreak never to underestimate those who despise dragons. Still, seasons turned and House Targaryen thrived. One crisp autumn morning, Aegon stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep, watching as Meraxes soared above, fully healed at last, Rhaenys upon her back. The pale dragon's roar echoed across the city, fierce and triumphant. Balerion and Vhagar joined her in a triple spiral, a breathtaking dance of living flame against the bright sky. The people of King's Landing craned their necks, pointing and gasping at the spectacle. Children clapped in delight. Old men shook their heads, recalling how one of those majestic beasts had once been shackled. But no shackles bound them now. Aegon felt a surge of hope. They had faced a terrifying challenge, one that might have spelled the end of House Targaryen before it fully began. But they had endured, and in doing so they had grown wiser. Their vigilance was stronger, their alliances broader, their willingness to strike first more certain. The stolen dragon had nearly undone them, yet in its aftermath, they had forged a sharper, more formidable dominion. As Balerion swooped down to land, stirring dust and scattering onlookers, Aegon climbed onto the beast's leg, letting the dragon's scales scrape against his armor. The tether between them hummed with mutual respect, a bond deeper than steel. He cast a final glance over his bustling capital. The towers of the Red Keep gleaming. He thought of the future, of the children who might someday ride these dragons, of the realm they would inherit. It was a realm born of fire and blood, now tempered by the knowledge that cunning could wound them as surely as an opposing army. But what was built on a sure foundation would stand. And so Aegon Targaryen, the Conqueror, soared into the sky upon Balerion the Black Dread, determined that no matter what storms or shadows awaited, House Targaryen would not be broken again.